Good afternoon and welcome. This is a special meeting of the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force called for Tuesday, March 30th, 2010 at 5 p.m. and beginning at 5:01 p.m. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Member Craven Green?
Here.
Craven Green present. Member Nee?
Here.
Nee present. Member Manny? Member Manny excused. Member Cawthon?
Here.
Cawthon present. Member Washburn?
Here.
Washburn present. Member Caneba?
Here.
Caneba present. Member Johnson? Member Johnson excused. Member Chan? Chan present. Member Goldman?
Present.
Goldman present. Mr. Chair, we have 7 ayes. No, 7. We have a quorum. Member Wolf?
Here.
Wolf present. Mr. Chair, we have 8. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Would like to bid Member Wolf back to the task force. He was sworn in about 10 minutes ago. We're very pleased that he's decided to rejoin us, particularly with all of the things that are going on right now on the technological side, and Mr. Wolf's long involvement and expertise in technological matters. I think his addition to the task force will be an especially welcome one. The purpose of this meeting is to look at proposed amendments to the Sunshine Ordinance. The task force hopes to, between this meeting and the next, to finalize form and content, and then to try to find 4 supervisors to sign off on it, to put it on the ballot for this November. With that, there is, you'll notice item 2 on the agenda, public comment for items listed, not listed on the agenda, and it's the usual practice to take those at 5 o'clock or shortly thereafter, so we will continue with that practice. And with that, let's proceed. What we will do on the public comment for the package is we'll go section by section. We'll take public comments per section, per segment, and if due to the fact that there are not a lot of people in the audience, and due to the fact that some of what we are discussing here has a bit of complexity, I think what I'm going to do is say that there is 5 minutes per public speaker instead of the usual 3, and depending on circumstances, we may even play fast and loose with that particular deadline. So with that, let's proceed. One other thing. You will notice, I hope you have in your packet a summary of the key changes. I prepared this over a period of several days. It was kind of a long task. This is a draft document. It's here to help guide us through what we're doing. It's here to highlight the major changes proposed for the ordinance. And eventually we're going to want to edit this also, put in some revisions, additions, deletions to this, and make its form and content something that will make it easily understandable by the members of the Board of Supervisors whom we approach. Naturally, they're going to have legislative aides go through the entire package, but this draft summary here will at least alert the supervisors we approach as to the major changes that we're proposing. With that, let us proceed. Section 67.1, Findings and Purpose. The only change in that entire section, in the entire article, as a matter of fact, in Article 1, is the name change of this body from Sunshine Ordinance Task Force to Sunshine Commission. Again, this will not, the name change in and of itself will not cause any changes in the mission, the responsibilities, et cetera, of the task force or the commission, and it will not change the members of appointment. of the members of the commission. The only thing that changes is the name, and the reason we want to change the name is to kind of enforce in the public's mind the fact that this is a permanent body. The name task force often implies ad hoc. This is not an ad hoc body by any means. This is a permanent body, and I think it will fix in the minds of the public and members of the city government the fact that we are a permanent entity. Is there anybody who on the task force who has any changes that he wishes to propose in, let's just take 67.1 first. Any changes in 67.1 that anyone wants to propose? Member Wolf. 67.1, section 67.1.
Oh.
Findings and purpose. Okay. No changes proposed in 67.1. Any changes in 67.2? Citation. This chapter may be cited as the San Francisco Sunshine Ordinance. Okay. Is there any public comment on any part of Article 1, either 67.1 or 67.2? Again, we're going to have a 5-minute time limit per speaker.
Hi, this is Kimo Crossman. Two minor issues. One is I understand the desire to name the task force something different. A couple concerns about using the word commission. There's a lot of regulations currently in the charter and other portions of administrative code that regulate the way things occur on commissions for appointments and things like that. And I'm concerned that if you name it a commission, then that means the task force falls under those criteria. It's my understanding that part of the reason they were named the task force was because it was considered a separate body outside the normal city hall structure of things. And while the board of supervisors appoints people to it, after that point, they have no control over it. So if you name it a commission, then anytime the mayor rolls out some new procedure or requirement for commissions, suddenly you guys are going to have to abide by that. So I think you should not call it a commission. I think you should call it a council or something else. But I think you're giving away a lot of power of yourselves if you name it what other bodies that are under the board of supervisors and the mayor's office are when they decide to be commissions. So my recommendation is to not name it a commission, name it something other than, task force, a council would be one possibility. So that's a concern I have about calling it a commission. There is a what is the Human Rights Council? No, I guess it's Human Rights Commission, I guess. So I don't know. So, and that's my impression is why they called it task force. And then 67.2 says this charter may be cited as San Francisco Sunshine Ordinance. There's been a lot of problems with the fact that the city attorney keeps calling this just an ordinance. It's my understanding that this would probably be legislation that would be adopted by the voters. The changes would be adopted by the voters. So why are we calling it an ordinance right here? It's at least an initiative, I believe. I'm not sure. And then there's been ongoing issues about whether it's part of the charter or not. Again, can we address that here in this section here where it says this chapter may be cited as the San Francisco Sunshine Ordinance? Can we change that and say as part of the charter? I don't know. I'm bringing those two issues up. Thank you.
Okay. Further public comment?
I actually support Kimo's points. I think one of the issues that came up fairly early on was the 6-vote rule before this task force, and whether in order to adopt any action you needed an absolute number of 6, irrespective of the number of members in attendance. At that time, I made an analysis, and I determined that actually the 6-vote rule did not apply because you are independent of the rules in the charter that govern commissions and other bodies within the executive department. Of course, the city attorney didn't agree, but the point is that if you call yourself a commission, then you're going to just move closer to that, and you're going to end up with the inability to adopt your own rules. And I think as a standalone body under a standalone law, independent of the city charter, that it would behoove you to avoid that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Any comment by the task force on the points raised by members, Monsieur Crossman and Grossman? Member Wolf.
Yeah, do we have a definition, what the city's definition of commission is, and how that might or might not change? Whether, the question is whether this would be substantive or not. It's an interesting point. I had not looked up what the definition of commission is and how it might change who or what we are.
I personally do not have one, and I would think that the deputy city attorney, were he here, would have one or would be able to find out pretty quickly. However, my recollection is that we did go over precisely this point when Ernie Laurenti was our deputy city attorney, and he gave us numerous assurances that changing the name of this body to a commission would not, number one, would not by itself put it under the city charter.
Okay.
And number two, would not result in a change in the method of appointing the members of this body. And as a matter of fact, further back in section, what would be new section 67.34, well, now, that's very interesting. This section does not make any mention of who appoints the task force or the commission. So that might be something when we get to that particular.
What do you mean, Rick?
I'm sorry?
I don't understand what you mean.
It's new section 67.34. It mentions the qualifications. It mentions how many members. Okay. Yeah, 11 voting members appointed by the Board of Supervisors. It specifies in there quite clearly, and we've been assured a number of times by Mr. Laurenti that if this body were to become a commission, that would not change.
If I may also, in that same section under the last paragraph, letter E on page 102 in the lower left-hand corner, none of that language has changed as far as the authority or the power, who gives powers to the commission. I think some of the concerns is if you're a commission, are you then subordinate to the overarching legislative authority, policy body, versus as a task force or some sort of agency operating independently or as an enterprise. That's all. I'm not so sure that there's any substantive change.
Well, since
I read through this.
My guess is that would not change, since the ordinance very clearly spells out the the mission and the authority of the task force. And I don't think changing our name to a commission would change that. Mm-hmm. That's my non-attorney's opinion.
Member Nee?
Member Cawthon.
I remember also from last time that there was some limitation placed on the term, because of placing the term commission, and I don't know if I'm remembering it 100% correctly, but we decided to stick with the task force, so maybe we should research that before we send it through. Asked Jerry Threet.
Member Craven Green.
We've already asked our deputy city attorney numerous times and been advised that there isn't any change. I don't know if we'd get a new answer. I think we need to move forward.
It's possible that somebody in the city attorney's office could render an additional opinion on it.
Well,
Might
Ernie
be the-
Laurenti did talk to Buck Deventhal from the government team about this issue and was advised by Buck Deventhal that it would not change our appointment process or powers. So we've done it. I just have let's.
In writing? Is there written evidence of that?
It was not in writing.
Well, I wonder if, I mean, I would hate to have to move this forward and then somebody create somebody raise a red flag about it and nitpick and, I wonder if it would be appropriate to at least get some sort of something in writing, considering that all other commissions are pretty much, we're not created by voter initiative. Some are.
Well, one other
Okay.
thing we could do, and that is in 67.1E, we could add a declaration or stipulation that the name change to a commission does not by itself result in any change to the duties or powers.
There's already a footnote on.
Annotation. It's not in the ordinance. It's
Yeah,
an annotation.
but still.
So it does have a different legal,
Okay.
weight. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's.
So perhaps some sort of a declaration or stipulation added to 67.1E would clarify that for everybody and kind of confirm it in the minds of anybody who has a question on it, including the voters and the supervisors we talk with. I will take it upon myself then, unless anybody else wants to volunteer, I will take it upon myself to add a sentence for our next special meeting, which is next Tuesday. Okay?
Mr. Chair, I have
Member Wolf?
a suggestion for section 67.2 as per Mr. Crossman's suggestion, maybe changing the word ordinance to act. No? And why not? Because it is a law, it was passed by the voters.
Ordinance is typically used in municipal legislation. Act is typically used in state legislation. That's not exclusive. But the sport is, it is different because this is passed by the voters. So it is an initiative. But when it gets codified as code. This was initially passed as an ordinance, which is why I guess that language is in here. And then it was passed by the voters as a charter amendment in 1999. So, I mean,
No, it was not a charter amendment.
Excuse me, by right initiative placed in the charter, made a charter body through that process, I would say. So, I mean, I just see this nomenclature at this point. I just think we just leave it and move on.
I agree.
All right.
Okay, I think there's,
I'm going to see if I could research that a little farther, if we can even use the word law, or code, even just the word code. I think ordinance makes it somewhat, equal to a simple process that's managed internally in the legislative process versus the initiative process. Usually voters don't vote ordinances. It's just, it could be semantical, but I think there is a difference.
Okay, I think at this point, Member Wolf, your research on that will be appreciated. Thank you very much. I think we should move on then to Article 2, Section 67.3, definitions.
I have something.
Member Cawthon.
Under 1, we changed, that our subject matter is anything under the jurisdiction of our policy body. Is changing it from city going to limit that for us? Is that going to limit our jurisdiction?
No.
I would say
Sorry,
not.
what section?
Oh,
What section?
it originally said
67.3,
67.3,
B1.
number 1 under
one.
B1.
You're talking about our jurisdiction as our
If
body?
it says that we've changed it to read that our jurisdiction is anything within the subject matter jurisdiction of the policy body, which is us. Before it said city, I'm just wondering if that's going to limit, you people have gone through this before, so I'm sure you thought of this as well. So you're saying, Ms. Craven Green, that this is not going to limit our jurisdiction?
It has no effect on the jurisdiction of this body whatsoever. It's the
would say not.
definition
It's
of,
the
it's the
definition of a
definition.
meeting.
Okay, under, let's see, I'm still under B, 4A, which says individual contacts. Let's see, a meeting shall not include individual contacts between a policy body member and another person that do not convey the views of the other members. Should we put a majority of the other members? Because this seems to me it would limit conversation with one person.
No, it's limiting the seriatim meetings. A member of the
No.
public giving a policy body member an opinion of another policy body member.
Right.
Majority. Just
But that's not a seriatim meeting. A seriatim meeting occurs when when a majority is involved.
Not necessarily. I believe that there's been recent case law on that. There's been recent case law on that. I mean, it should be broader. It's even I mean, that's my understanding. But this is existing. We're not the only thing we're changing here. This is exactly as the ordinance has been. There's been no problems with it. The only thing we're doing is the intent was clarifying. Rick Nee suggested adding of the policy body to clarify only. So this is existing, no changes, no problem.
Right. My understanding of a seriatim meeting, and I tell this to the library CAC all the time, is when a majority of the members are engaged in discussing something outside of a regular meeting, that becomes a seriatim meeting. But this seems to say that I can't call up Chair Nee with a concern about an issue.
We'll see.
Well-
Seriatim can also be a chain. So you call him, he calls her, she calls him.
It's
and you have a
playing
meeting.
telephone.
You see?
Also,
But it's not a seriatim meeting if I call one
also,
other
Member
person.
Cawthon, I
I'm
think
asking a
this
question.
also
My
has
question
to
would
do.
be, is it a seriatim meeting if I call one other person and discuss my views?
You'll need to ask Jerry Threed about that when he's back. But my point is that this language does not affect anything within the current ordinance. It only provides
It's
clarification.
clarificatory.
That's it. So if you have want clarification on what a seriatim meeting is, you should ask DCA Treat, because it is a complex issue. I don't mean to downplay it.
And there is also, the purpose of this particular paragraph is to bar the use of third parties, third persons, as a way of communicating, as a way of members of a policy body communicating with each other behind closed doors.
Okay.
In other words, they're not supposed to do it directly, they're not supposed to use a third party to do it either. And that's what paragraph A here is all about.
Okay, I'm going to go over to paragraph C, the last line, where it says that if you have a meeting in a restaurant, or you can't have a meeting in a place where public access is only possible in consideration of making a purchase or some other payment. I would change in consideration of to after, only to make the language a little clearer.
Okay, where are we now? Which paragraph?
I'm on page 6, under D.
D for David.
I'm under C, pardon me, last line. Line 14, yeah. I would just take out in consideration of and say after, so it would read such meetings cannot be conducted where public access is possible only after making a purchase,
Or only when making a purchase.
whatever.
Or expected.
I just
mean,
didn't like in consideration of because I don't
it's
know
a
what
term
that
of,
means.
It's a term of art. It's a term of art. It just basically means,
I just
in
think we should
exchange.
clean up the language. It doesn't matter how it's done.
well, we need to figure it out. That's the part. We have to come here with specifics. We can't just go back and forth
My
consistently.
suggestion is that we
So,
take out in consideration
if you put
and
after, that doesn't make the timing
and
right.
put after.
The timing's not right, because it could be before or on expectation of in the future. I mean,
What it would say is that you can't meet somewhere where people are only admitted after they make a purchase.
or on promise or anything else. It's after is the problem. It's after implies a timing issue. If we just leave in consideration, I think it's fine.
Or how about
It's
when?
at any
What
time-
about
at any
when?
time.
Yeah,
I
well,
think consideration works just fine. Consideration is a legal term.
I don't know what,
Consideration is part of a contract.
the thing is that people who read the Sunshine Ordinance are in many cases lay people, and I want to make it the language as simple as possible.
I agree with that intent, but I don't want to just add something in that's going to create further ambiguity. Yeah, it's in the Brown Act. It's consistent.
Okay, I detect consensus for leaving the language as is.
Okay, I have some items. On page 13, lower right-hand corner, page 13, page 9 in the middle of the page. Number 5, let's see, this would be D5, starting with notwithstanding the provisions. I'm wondering, so the first line, notwithstanding the provisions, paragraph 4 above, quote-unquote, passive meeting body, unquote, should it not be shall also include a meeting? That
Where?
consists solely of, it's the second line, number 5, notwithstanding the provisions of paragraph 4 above, passive meeting body shall, the language that's there says shall include a meeting that consists solely of employees. But shouldn't it be shall also include a meeting? No? Yes, no?
It's not to the exclusion. It's not saying, it's not excluding other passive meeting bodies. It's just saying what it also includes. I mean, we can put also in there, but it's certainly not necessary whatsoever.
Well,
And it
because,
basically, we're just leaving it the same. The end result is that it will be the same as it is now. It's a little bit confusing about how we
well,
edited it.
but this is something that you added very
No,
recently.
we did not. That's
It's
what's
got a double
confusing.
underline
And
on
look
it.
what's beneath it, a single strike through. It's the exact same language. We had,
Okay.
what we had done is try to alter the definitions of passive meeting bodies, and we got ourselves into a situation where we felt that we were doing more harm than good, so we went back to the original language. But
I
to
see.
reflect that issue with this body, we needed to reflect it that way, so that there's a double underline saying the Compliance and Amendments Committee put it back in, but in a single underline showing that it was originally stricken by the full task force.
The only concern I have
So-
is that you're repeating it twice. You have two definitions. Actually, it's all under this, under D is passive being body
Mm-hmm.
inclusive of, I guess, all of these parts.
Except
But the
4.
repetition of starting with 4 and then adding, and then having 5, would seem to me to be more clear to say that it's not either or, that number 5 is also in addition to number 4. I mean, notwithstanding
Well,
provisions.
number 4
I mean,
says it's not a meeting. And so number 5 is saying, which is common in legislation, the last one says, oh, by the way, this isn't a meeting. But number 5 will say, notwithstanding that, these narrow subcategory
Is a
do
meeting.
qualify.
Okay. All right. So then in that case, it
Attorney,
does-
I'm not finished when he's done.
Member Cawthon?
This is something, this is basically in terms of making a little more sense to me. A is what city, I'm going back to the beginning of 67.3. And my question is, A is what the city means, B is what meeting means. And we get to C over on page 11, line 4. It says a policy body should mean. Policy body is referred to a lot of times in number B. So my suggestion was, why don't we put B, what a policy body is, and C, what a meeting is. I mean, it just would transpose the two so that when you're reading B, it seems to me that you have to know what a policy body is before you have to know what a meeting is. The meeting talks about policy body all the way through, but it's not yet defined until you get to C.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of legislation just defines them alphabetically. And that perhaps is what was going on here. And it just assumes that you can read all of the definitions and therefore apply them appropriately. I have no opinion on this either way, except that I think that unless something's really truly necessary for clarification, we should leave it as is, or else it's going to look like we've made a huge slew of changes that we haven't.
Well, I'm just making changes that occur to me as I go over it.
No,
the
I
next
appreciate it.
one-
I don't mean to not
That's okay.
appreciate it.
I think in both cases, people will go ahead, I always go ahead and look for definitions as well, and I think that people can do that. I just thought it flowed a little more logically if policy body was B.
I think that's
And
true.
But it's not that big a deal. Now, down here under C5, we take mayor out. It's on page 7. C is line 4.
This is packet page 7 or
I'm sorry, it's page 7, I guess, of, which one am I looking at? The right-hand corner or the,
You're looking, I believe it,
the
right-hand corner, page 11.
sorry?
You're looking at right-hand corner, page 11.
packet page
It's
11.
page 11, okay.
Yeah.
It's page-
Let me try it this way. What happened was that through the prior round, we decided that what we were going to do was to make any body created by the mayor a policy body. And therefore, we had to do substantial revisions to the definition of policy body and then also passive meeting body, because bodies created by the mayor were passive meeting bodies. We decided to revert that. So the Compliance and Amendments Committee recommends going back to the way it was. It's language that has been applied by city departments, not without problem, but they seem to have reached a certain level of accommodation at it. And unless someone has a better idea, we reverted back. So mayor was put in by this body initially and then taken out by the Compliance and Amendments Committee to revert it to the original language.
But it's back in, so it now reads advisory
reads-
body,
No,
et
it's
cetera,
out.
committee or other
Got
body.
a double strike through, it's out.
Is mayor struck out? So do we refer to the mayor later on?
In passive
Okay,
meeting
good.
bodies, it's there.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, I have
Member Wolf?
in section E on page 13, lower right-hand corner. With regards to electronic media, one of the concerns I have is the difference between digital divide and versus digital inclusion. Digital divide would describe people who have no access to electronic media at all, which means that the postings would have to be done on site, on the physical location of the of the building itself. And I know that in Roman numeral 5 on the following page at the top, it does talk about that, but I'll get to that in just a moment. Digital inclusion piece I feel is important too. My concern is that we're now trying to move everything to electronic, but there are still some people who don't have access to electronic, and we know that. I have firsthand experience working with marginalized communities, and they still don't have access, and waiting online at the library or some other location is sometimes onerous for them. So I had started to add, make an addition in Roman numeral 1, E1. It's small. It's a letter I there. that would say something to the effect of to add on to the end of that sentence, and at the location in plain sight of public view. And then I turned the page. And then I saw that it was there. I'm a little concerned that as soon as practicable is not necessarily within the spirit of the open meetings law. I mean, the open meetings law is minimum, at bare minimum, 72 hours. And I would like that to be carried over. So I'd like to strike as soon as practicable and replace that with 72 hours.
Member Washburn?
I agree with Member Wolf. I think he raises an important issue, and we should change the language accordingly.
Conform it with the rest of E.
Well, just so
And
you
also-
know, I mean, right now, we need to make sure, and I'm not saying I disagree, in fact, I agree. I'm not necessarily in favor of putting it in, but I agree with the sentiment that right now there is actually no requirement in the ordinance about posting outside the meeting room. It's the practice of most secretaries of bodies and commissions to post it outside the room. The only requirements are that you post it on, I believe, on the website. I think that's already existing on the department's website, already exists. And the second is that you have to post it to the main library. And then there's some other provisions about mailed notice, but those are the only two provisions that currently apply. So
Not in the Brown Act?
the Brown Act may have something different, but I don't recall that it does. I don't have the Brown Act with me.
I can look it up.
Microphone, please, Member Chan. I actually
some
don't
public
recall.
place
I don't have. Oh, do you
that
have the?
people.
I will look it up. I know where it is, Chris. Thank you. So I'm not necessarily. My point is I'm not necessarily opposed to this. I'm just saying it's going to be a big administrative burden on the city. We should be cognizant of that as we move forward. That's all. Is this something we really want to force them to do? And if so, then let's put it in. But let's discuss it.
Yeah, my concern is it's not, it's more as pertaining to, can be consistent with the law versus, whether it's convenient or inconvenient or costs more money. What currently is the law? Do we have the authority to then override it or?
Yes, we of course have the ability to we can go beyond the Brown Act. So we can go beyond whatever's in this ordinance. So we can do whatever we want.
But as soon as practicable can mean less than 72 hours,
Of course,
which
yes.
is not expanding. Expanding would be 5 days in advance, would be making it having more.
Only if there's a
sunshine.
minimum requirement, Bruce, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
Chair Nee, I have something. Under 4, we're on page 13, line 20, regarding posting of notices for passive meeting bodies. At the end, after it says at the main library, and I would also say on the passive meeting body's website.
But they don't have websites, by and large.
Well, the one I know the best does, and they do post it, but I think it's a good idea. If somebody wants to know if they're going to have a meeting, they can go to the website. They don't have to go to the library.
I think what happens is often that it's posted on the policy body's website, who sponsors the passive meeting or is related to the passive meeting. Is that perhaps what you mean?
I think in practice, if it's posted on the passive meeting body's website, then the person who's interested in the passive meetings can simply go to the passive meeting body's website. So I would suggest that be attached to line 21.
What we could say is on the website of the passive meeting body or of the policy body to which the passive meeting body reports.
Okay.
Or you could just say on the policy body of the website if it exists.
Passive meeting body's website if it exists.
But
Yeah.
I mean, the person who's wants to go to the meeting, to the passive meeting, will go to the passive meeting body's website. We've had cases like this where people say they're not getting notice, and it may well be posted on the policy body's website, but maybe they don't know to go there. So that I think that if I could just finish, I think that you can't be too safe. If you post it on the policy body's website, fine with me. If you post it at the library, that's cool as well. But I think you definitely should post it on the website of the body that you're interested in, which in this case is the passive meeting body.
Which passive meeting bodies are you experienced with that have websites?
The passive meeting body that does post them on their website is the Council of Neighborhood Libraries. But we've had cases where people have...
And they have a San Francisco sponsored website?
We've had cases where people have complained to the task force that they didn't get notice of a passive meeting. However, if it were posted on the passive meeting body's website, then that would be the logical place to look.
Well, and the other issue is that what the new thing, one of the major new things here is that we're creating a centralized website where all notices of meetings, whether they be passive or public, have to be posted. There's going to be a centralized website. So that's going to be a huge deal for people who want to know what's going on in City Hall and want to find out when a particular body is meeting. So I'm not saying we shouldn't look at these specifics. I think my concern is that most passive meetings don't have websites. I would rather leave that out. They're going to be required to post it to the centralized location.
I don't know that most passive meeting bodies don't have websites. I do know of one that does. I don't see any reason to exclude this from the logical place to post it is a website. In addition to these other places, give people the maximum opportunity to be able to determine when a meeting is going to be held.
Member Knebber?
I mean, we just have to be sensitive for the passive meeting bodies that don't have websites. And I think that by covering it and saying that it has to be posted on the main policy body's website, we can put "and" that if applicable. But I think we have to really cover our ground and make sure, like we do, and make sure it's on the main public. But I think this is just, I deal with a lot of passive bodies, and I don't think a lot do have. Some do, and they're great, but I think we need to face
Well, I don't see, I agree with you that we could add, and if applicable or if feasible on the passive meeting body's website, that would cover all the bases.
Member Wolf?
Yep. Member Craven Green, section 954.2.
2A.
A. So the area, the substantive code is the agenda shall specify the time and location of the regular meeting shall be posted in a location that is freely accessible to members of the public.
Right, and that's why the city has interpreted that to be the public library. And so that's what's been the consistent thing. So
Okay.
This ordinance does nothing to minimize that. It raises the floor in terms of posting on other websites, but it doesn't do anything in terms of that.
Is in my experience, let's say with another agency like the Community College District, their interpretation of freely accessible is it's the ability of it to be physically seen at all times.
Right?
So if you go to the library, is it freely to be seen at all times, even when the building's closed?
But if you post it on the website of the body in question,
We're
if
not-
But Bruce,
applicable, if you post it there,
don't the
then you
buildings-
know.
Excuse me, I believe Member Wolf had the floor.
Sorry.
The way it works at the Community College District is at 33 Goff Street. They have big plate glass window on the front, and they post the agenda on that plate glass window. So you can walk up to the building at any time and see the agenda. And it's freely accessible to anybody. And they consider that was a big to-do because there were lots of really bad things that were happening there. People weren't getting agendas in time. They weren't mailed properly or what have you. People didn't have access to the internet. Here they were able to walk up to the building at 4 o'clock in the morning and read the agenda. And that they consider it to be accessible.
That would be impossible for the city and county of San Francisco. All of the agendas and notices that are provided, if you go to the library, who's been to the library to look at the binder? How big is it, Mr. Crossman? How many? It's like this,
Mr. Crossman,
right?
could you approach
Okay.
the mic?
I
All right,
understand.
so requiring that every meeting and every city hall meeting and for public and policy bodies be listed somewhere 24 hours a day accessible is not going to
Right,
impossible.
so, right.
And it's
so-
not required by the law.
Well, I mean, the question is what does freely accessible mean?
I think
And-
that's right. So let's move on to that and make a decision. Now, we've done additional things here. Do you have something specific you'd like I think your specific proposal is that we should require every person who's posting a notice to make sure it's at the outside of the meeting room 72 hours in advance. That's the proposal. I think that's going to cause a substantial increase in the duties of individuals who are complying with these requirements that we're putting on them. That's my concern. If this board wants to vote to put it on, let's do it. And if they don't, because it's too much of a burden, let's not.
Well, then I move to add, to strike as soon as practicable and add 72 hours.
No later than 72 hours
Yes,
before the
No
start of
later.
each meeting?
right.
Right, to make it consistent.
Okay.
And it should also be changed in line 14, which also says practicable. I don't like that
Yes,
word
and
anyway.
striking. as soon-
I'm sorry.
Line 14, page 14.
That's different. Let's not address that yet, please. Let's do one at a time.
Separate, it's a
Separate.
separate section, actually. Separate section. We'll,
That's the next section, which we're not at yet.
okay. There is a motion on the
Okay,
floor.
so
Was there a second?
I just want to clarify the language, unless we're going to adopt it in concept and clean up the language later.
No, we need to do it
No,
now.
we-
So it would say, all notices and/or agendas shall be physically posted outside the meeting room no later than 72 hours from the start of each meeting.
72 hours before the
let's just-
start of each meeting.
Let's use at least. It's consistent with the prior four subsections.
Okay,
Okay, so at least 72 hours in advance of the meeting is the way that they all read.
Okay.
72 hours in advance of the meeting.
at least 72 hours in advance of the meeting, of each meeting. Okay.
Okay, Mr.
We need a vote after we have public comment.
it's-
A second.
There's been moved and seconded. Mr. Rustum, are you keeping up with us? Do you know where we are? Okay, thank you. Is there public comment on this motion or on any other part of of what we've been discussing so far with respect to section 67.3?
Hi, Kimo Crossman. First of all, a couple of general things. When people say don't do this because it might be administrative burden, I have a solution. If you want to be concerned about administrative burden, why don't you just cancel all the meetings at City Hall? And then there'll be no administrative burden at all, anybody. The administrative burden on staff is running meetings, taking minutes, sending out agendas, so forth. It's not a significant administrative burden to post a notice that's already been created. So I just want to, I'm concerned when I start hearing people talk about administrative burden as a reason not to do anything. Sunshine's expensive, but the value of it is well acknowledged. As my understanding, so far, Chris has not made no changes today in this meeting. I just want to make that observation. I haven't seen any indications yet that Chris should make any changes to this, what we've reviewed. Because it's been a little bit of a chaos here, so I just wanted to observe that. In general, I would say that there are some areas of the language that are unclear, and I would recommend the task force in general put some provision somewhere in the ordinance that says the task force may interpret the provisions of the ordinance with binding, make binding interpretations and issue additional regulations for enforcement of the Sunshine ordinance. You guys already have a provision for that with regards to speakers and how to do speakers, but I think it would be very valuable to have some provision in your legislation that says you have the power to interpret things more fully and issue regulations on how they should be followed. Because otherwise you just have the state attorney saying, well, we don't agree with that interpretation, you don't have to do that. So those are some general observations. The next thing is, I'm wondering on page 9, it says a meeting shall mean one of the following. It has a variety of listings. It doesn't talk about departmental hearings, and I don't know if that needs to be included in the definitions or not. But, you know, there's lots of departments that have hearings at City Hall, and I don't see any reference to department hearings or any sort of aspect of that. I just want to bring that up as a concern that it may have been dropped. And, you know, even when we go into policy bodies, all this stuff, there's a lot of dropping of, I'm just concerned this whole provision of department hearings is oftentimes not included in all these requirements for postings and agendas. And it's of a concern to me that people may have trouble learning about those hearings that may occur at a department level that the public would otherwise be allowed to attend. Let's see, if we move to page 12, well, we're talking about passive meeting bodies, and it talks about, as we know, the famous provision with regards to it's not a passive meeting if it's only employees of the city of San Francisco. One issue I ran into in the past was when the city invited consultants to come to meetings, and they had paid consultants or just consultants coming to meetings with only city employees to advise them on how to do things. So it was city employees, it was our consultants, but the public couldn't attend. And the question is, are consultants considered employees and therefore the public, they're not passive meetings? Or are consultants considered outside participants and therefore the public can attend as well? That definitely happened with regards to the Wi-Fi issue where they brought in consultants. They were making lots of decisions about direction and approach, but the public couldn't attend those meetings, even at a passive meeting level. They claimed that a consultant was considered an employee and therefore the public could not attend. So I want to bring up that concern on page 12. Is it a consultant an employee or not? On page 13, the interesting provision that says that even on these passive meetings, if it's a passive meeting regarding public health, safety, or welfare, or related services for the homeless, that language has always been a little weird because it says public health, comma, safety, comma, or welfare, or relating to service. That first "or" seems like it wouldn't be right. Isn't it means on public health, or safety, or welfare, or relating to the homeless? It's a little unclear to me about that. It's always been a little strange. Let's see. Also on page 13 on E2, it's all notices or agendas and agendas if created for passive meeting bodies. Okay, so we are on the next page. You know, we said that now passive meetings are required to have notices. Is that right?
Yes.
So that's a little. And I guess just in summary, real quick, there's a lot of discussion about posting and of passive meetings and all that. Really, there should be a provision for a push notification. There's no provision for allowing someone to subscribe to get notifications of passive meetings, either by email or RSS feed or something like that. You don't want to make people have to go to a website to find out the information. They should be able to ask, you know, hey, put me on the list and let me know when there's another passive meeting. That's been I've had that battle a couple times. And email's a free way to notify people. There's the only provision what that talks about if the public inquires about it, but I've had that interpreted as meaning that you have to ask every time. Is there another meeting? When is it going to be? You should be able to just ask, hey, let me put me on the list, and I'll know from now on. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment on section 67.3, including the motion that's on the floor.
The motion, what is the motion that's on the floor?
Okay, the motion, sir, if on
as soon as practicable?
page 14 of the packet.
As soon as practicable is going to be replaced.
Right, as soon as practicable.
That's the motion we're discussing, right?
And anything else in 67.3 that you wish to discuss. So it's 67.3 and that motion.
Well, I did want to say that I think we've been over every single word in this 100 times at the Compliance and Amendments Committee meetings. And I don't see that it serves any purpose for us tonight to go over every word. It seems like we should be dealing with the larger ideas that are presented by the changes in this, because these words have been gone over and over. As soon as practicable we went back and forth on that so many times, Because, for example, if a meeting is to be held at the boathouse out at Lake Merced, that means that 72 hours prior to that, Park and Rec would have to send somebody out to post a meeting, to post notice up on the wall at the boathouse at Lake Merced,
Right.
where nobody goes except once a week. It's ridiculous, and it's a terrible waste of time. What if the meeting is at some far-flung location, and meetings frequently are not always held at City Hall? I think we missed that point, and that's why we decided as soon as practicable, because practical has a meaning that you have to take practicality into view. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment?
Policy body is a defined term, and it's initially capitalized, so wherever it's used, it should be initially capped, and that will tell the reader that later on in the definition section, there is in fact a definition of policy body. It's a simple, very basic drafting matter that should have been attended to a long time ago. In any case, on page 9, item 2, a series of gatherings, which suggests physical gatherings, but in this day and age, I have learned from my grandkids that you can have iChats with multiple people and video conferences. Are those gatherings? I don't know. But I would be suspect if I heard that that's what those gatherings consisted of. On page 11, in lines 9 and 10, I don't understand, is initiative in or out?
Out.
So it reads, any board, commission, committee, or other body created by a policy body?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
So that would not apply to the new Sunshine Commission, correct?
No. It would. We're a policy body.
Well, you're not. You're not a board or commission or other body enumerated in the charter.
That's what.
2. You're not 3. You're now not 4, or whatever it is, 5. I mean, 4 and 5 actually should be flipped. So think about it.
We are 2.
Okay, and then let's go to page 13, the 72 hours notice. The 72 hours for a meeting on Tuesday includes the weekend, generally. Or might you actually, for a meeting on Monday, include the weekend of 48 hours. So in many cases, like the Ethics Commission, which meets, I think, on Monday, you don't get a lot of time because they'll post it at when it's 73 hours before the 2:30 or whatever the meeting time is. My suggestion would be either make it 72 hours and exclude weekends, or extend it to 96 hours and get another day in. Because my experience has been when you go to the website and look for it and late on a Friday, you don't see it. You don't see it actually until they post it, which is 2 minutes before 5. There are a number of other comments. For example, in Roman 3 on page 13 in line 18, the word notices, I think, should be included because it is everywhere else in I through 4. And on line 12, the word, all notices and agendas for policy meeting bodies. There's no policy meeting body as far as I know. There's either a policy body or a passive meeting body.
So what was that last comment, Mr. Grossman? Can you repeat that last comment?
Pardon?
The last comment, can you repeat that? I missed it.
If you look on line 12, page 13, all notices and agendas for policy meeting bodies, I think you mean policy bodies.
That's correct.
Meetings shall be posted. The words were inverted. But I really think the most important thing is to give people who have an interest in the meeting enough time to absorb what's going to go on at the meeting. And the 72 hours, if it includes the weekend, simply isn't enough time where the meetings are on a Monday or Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. We do have a motion on the floor.
Can I just clarify something before we vote? I
Member
was
Cawthon?
taken by what Mr. Grossman just said about page 13, line
Line 12.
line 12. So is it now going to read all notices and agendas for policy meetings or for
Policy
for
bodies.
policy bodies? Okay.
And then line 18 can be all notices and agendas for policy bodies.
And also line 15, the if created, we should probably strike that since there's what we were saying.
No, no, because agendas do not have to be created for policy bodies, but they can be, and if they are, they should be posted. Passive, thank you. That's what I meant. I think we can handle the changes to 1 and 3 without objection, but
Agreed.
we'll have to vote on the other one.
Agreed.
I'm adamantly against
Okay,
it.
Mr. Russom, are you with us on these? Yes. Okay, thank you. Further discussion on the motion. Member Craven Green.
I mean, I'm against it for the reasons that Doug Comstock said, the motion. I think it's there's too many meetings all over the place. I think it's too much burden. I think even if you limited it to meetings on site at City Hall, which would be the minimum suggestion I would suggest for people who want this motion passed, is to limit it for postings of meetings at City Hall. It's still too much of a burden.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Member Wolf.
My reason for supporting this is because some areas are so far out and people don't have an opportunity to get access to an agenda. And if they know that meetings are happening at that particular location, we provide them with any opportunity to get at least some notice that a meeting is happening. So if it's happening at a police department's community room, and they don't have access to the internet, and they are unable to get to the library, and if the mail didn't go out in time from City Hall, at least they have an opportunity to walk over to the building and see that there is actually a meeting happening that week, so that they can plan their schedule to be there or what have you. So to me, I don't think it's unreasonable at all. I see plenty of other bodies do it. They do it for all 11 or so campuses in City College, which is all over the city. And so I don't see why there should be any problem. I think that what's happening in City Hall already, they do it already in City Hall. People walk around, there are bulletin boards outside of every meeting room.
When do they do it? Do they do it before the meeting, which is what this requires?
I've seen most of the time they've been at least 48 hours. I've not seen them the day of or just before the meeting. I'll walk around and I'll see, oh, there's a meeting coming up in 2 days or 3 days, what have you. So I don't think it's unreasonable. I think a little extra effort on those areas really helps the public get more information. That's what we're here for. Provide as much sunshine as possible. Thank you.
Okay. I believe we're ready for the roll call.
On the motion, Member Craven Green.
No.
Craven Green, no. Member Cawthon.
Aye.
Cawthon, aye. Member Washburn.
Aye.
Washburn, aye. Member Knebber. Knebber, aye. Member Wolf. Wolf, aye. Member Chan. Chan, aye. Member Goldman. Goldman, no. Member Nee.
No.
Member Nee, no. Mr. Chair, we have 5 ayes and 3 noes.
Okay. I believe the motion fails, and the language is kept as is. And I believe, okay, it is now just past 6 o'clock, and at this time we will take public comment on matters not on today's agenda.
Hi, Kimo Crossman. I'd like to find out, I'm surprised that a majority vote is not sufficient to make changes to the document in discussion. If there was such a, seems like a, it would be, a majority would be sufficient to me, so I'm surprised that it's not. So I just want to register that concern. I've definitely seen that to be the case for at the commission, at the committee level. With regards to, again, I want to reemphasize my feelings here that I think it would be very wise for the task force to adopt a provision that says that you have an ability to, provide binding interpretation of the ordinance and issue additional regulations on how to implement it if that's not fully described as it currently exists, in hopes that any language that needs to be clarified can at a later point.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on non-agenda items?
I did want to agree with Mr. Crossman with regard to his last statement, but I think would be an inappropriate place to put it. I think it would be more appropriate under 6742, referrals and enforcement. But that's just my thought.
Thank you. Further public comment?
I didn't comment earlier because I was uncertain what the changes were about or directed to. I'm thinking perhaps a semicolon where there's the commas and ors involved might have been useful to make it more accurate if that was what you had intended, such as any blah blah or blah blah semicolon or. In the two cases enumerated as in board, commission or other body, and also the health, safety, or homeless. Those two phrases.
Okay, thank you. Further public comment?
With all due respect to Mr. Laurenti and his off-the-cuff opinions about what applicable rules or law might be, I think you make, personally, I think there's a tendency to accept these pronouncements by deputy city attorneys as if they've been handed down from the mount. In point of fact, they're often wrong, and what it does is it creates an environment where someone like myself finds that he's rowing against the current, because this body is perfectly willing to accept something Laurenti says, even though I'm a better trained lawyer, I'm probably a better lawyer, I've certainly practiced a longer time, and I really think that I have a better sense of what the relationship is between these laws and the city charter. So, having said that, I would appreciate you're taking that into consideration when you quote Mr. Laurenti on any issue. That's one thing. Another thing that I think is really important as you go through this process, this is your one chance. You've been working for years to put this to bed. And I think you should take advantage of the fact that you can really nail this down in the areas where it is really important and not equivocate because somebody thinks it's either too big a burden or somebody else might not like it or some commission might not agree with you. If this is going to end up in the law, then you make it as strong and as clear and definitive as you possibly can. Because when the voters get it, they're not going to parse that stuff. Believe me, they're not going to parse it. And you're going to end up with a really strong law, and one which will clearly establish that you are an independent, self-governing body, and you don't have to take anything from anybody. You make your own rules, and your rules are the rules. And I think it's important that you maintain that. And the fact that the city attorney doesn't even have a lawyer here now, and what we're doing is wordsmithing 109 pages, I think is really very, very sad. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. And I believe that takes us now to section 67.4, passive meeting bodies conduct of business.
I have one
Member Cawthon?
before I leave. This is just in line with trying to make the language as clear as possible. It's page 14, line 14, the word practicable. I just don't like that word. It's a legal word. It's not a clear word. You could substitute feasible, which in fact is a synonym for practical in the dictionary. You can substitute practical, which is a synonym for practicable in the dictionary. That would be my suggestion, just to clean up the language.
Okay. Is there any other comment on section 67.4? All right, what is the feeling on that word practicable? Is it desirable to change to feasible or practical, or should we leave it as is?
I like it as is.
It's fine.
Okay, consensus is to leave it as is. Is there any public comment on section 67.4?
Hi, Kimo Crossman. I just want to say that it would be I would prefer it if the public could give comments before it goes to the task force for additional conversation. Because by the time we give our comments, you guys have gone back and forth on it a while. You're pretty exhausted about the section, and you're not really receptive to comments from the public. You're ready to just kind of move on. So like all the comments that, that everyone just made, they just whipped past and they had no effect. So I would prefer if you ask for public comment at the beginning of the section. With that stated, this is 67.4. So I would just say that there's a provision it talks about passive meetings, and the one thing that I would say is that there's been an ongoing problem where people have passive meetings and they attend them, and the public can't. All they can do is sit there and observe the meeting. And I would suggest that a provision be written to allow for general public comment at the end of the meeting. That's actually being done kind of on a casual basis at many City Hall where they have passive meetings, but they'll have a general public comment item as the last item in the agenda. I think it's easy to do. It just required that a passive meeting body have one general public comment by the public if they wish to. Right now, they really have no voice in passive meetings. There's no requirement to take minutes in passive meetings, so that's not a big deal. They're not required to record the discussions, so it's not an administrative burden. But I think it would be good to allow the public to at least say something about it. We heard from the gentleman that covers the homeless shelters, and he attends all those meetings, but he can't say anything because, he's not a member of the passive meeting, and so he just sits there and listens to their discussions. And I think it would be appropriate for them to be able to hear the public's voice. And so that would be my recommendation on that matter.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on section 67.4? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Is there any sentiment toward taking Mr. Crossman's suggestion on requiring public comment at passive meeting bodies? Okay, I think if we wanted to do that, it would require a motion, since this would be a substantive change. Is there a motion?
It's a huge change. It is a huge change.
Excuse me, would the audience please not comment?
It's a significant change. People are going to think, oh, all right, well, it's a new requirement, passive meeting bodies to take public comment, as opposed to doing the discretion. There's many doing the discretion, but it is a change.
It would be a significant change. Is there a motion to change the language? Seeing none,
I'll move it for the point of discussion.
moved. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Discussion?
So at what point would, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Bruce Wolf, at what point would it be onerous for public comment to be excluded from a passive meeting body? Why should we not?
To be
include it?
excluded?
To be excluded. Or no, included, I'm sorry. Why would it be onerous to include it?
It would extend the length of the meetings, primarily. So right now, they can take comment if they want. They don't have to take it for any particular amount of time, but they are. So what this would require is that every single passive meeting would have to allow public comment, and that public comment would be 3 minutes, which is what we've expanded it to for policy bodies. That's the issue. And so you have a meeting that then can.
Well, is the subject matter of a passive meeting body any less substantive?
Yes.
It is. You would say it is. Because they're not policy bodies.
Please be seated. Further discussion? Member Knebber and then Member Washburn. Member Washburn and then
Yeah, go ahead.
Member Washburn and then Member Knebber.
Well, it's my understanding that the business of a passive meeting body isn't as substantive of that of a policy meeting. But nonetheless, what happens in a passive meeting can inform policy making. So it seems to me that matters could be discussed there and that public comment might be helpful, might be warranted at that stage of thinking about a particular issue that might then go to a policy body. I don't know if it's possible to split the difference here and strongly encourage that public comment be, general public comment be taken. But I can see where it, in an ideal situation, would be a good thing.
Member Knebber?
I lean towards agreeing that, yes, it's by definition, they're less substantive meetings, but it is in the process of making a decision. And I mean, in the spirit of sunshine, I just don't see why we shouldn't. I do think that we should put that language in there. I understand that it's going to make, be burdensome on meeting, but it is, people are making decisions there. They might not be decisions for the policy body, but they're usually recommendations to go back and discuss for that policy body. So I don't see why excluding this part of that decision-making process is warranted.
Okay. Further discussion? Member Craven Green.
I have a problem. Then the only difference between the administrative requirements that are going to be, or the operational requirements of passive meetings and policy bodies is minutes. That's the only distinction that will be remain. And I just think that the whole reason we set it up, and agendas, they don't have to create agendas. The reason why they set up this distinction, that this ordinance has this particular distinction, the Brown Act has something a little bit different, is because it recognizes there are different types of bodies, and that if a passive meeting body is discussing a policy issue and making a recommendation, that will go before the policy body for approval. And at that point, there has to be public comment. And you can have a 10-hour MTA meeting. But, if the passive meeting body dealing with transportation is going to be required to have, public comment of a certain amount, that really is going to change the nature and the dynamic of these meetings. A lot of times these meetings are just people sitting around and talking. But sometimes they're very big meetings, and that will create a burden. So I really just think that we have a system, a two-tiered system now, and it's set up for that reason with that structure, and I think we should keep it. Except for, we have put initial burdens on them, which is the noticing. Tell people when your meetings are. I think that's a good step forward, and I think that's what's appropriate.
Member Wolf?
Yeah, I do want to pay heed, we haven't been able to do any kind of incremental change to this law at all. And so we do really kind of get one bite of the apple. At the same time, well, we don't, I mean, the next bite of the apple could be another 10 years. I mean, it depends upon the attitude and the behavior of the city and its voters. So my concern is to try and put what we feel is important in there, not to turn off legislators like immediately. There'll be like an immediate, no, I'm not doing this, but at least to provide some dialogue to maybe provide some of what we need that needed to be incremental over the years, which I think is what we're trying to do. I don't think we should exclude it. I think we should include it, and then let's test the waters and see what they think. If they don't like it, then they can strike it. But I think for the purposes of what we're doing, we want to try and build and expand or grow the document, the law, to provide as much sunshine as possible. So I would say I think I would agree with my colleagues that let's try it. Let's put it in there. Let's see what people say about it. I've been to a lot of passive meeting bodies. They do allow public comment. Not many people show up. It doesn't really expand the meeting, that much. And the minutes, lots of times the minutes that they're taking are mostly action minutes, and they're not, it's mostly a recommendation that's being moved forward anyway. So
We need a motion with specific language. This is what the purpose of this is to have
Okay,
specific
well,
language.
Okay, well, I'll need a few minutes. Then what I would ask is, can I pull something out that's there previous, and is there a suggestion of language so we can use currently standard language
Well,
that's already there?
what we could say is such gatherings must provide opportunities for comment by members of the public, and the person presiding may entertain such questions or comments from members of the public as may be relevant to the business of the gathering.
That's fine.
Well,
What's the difference between the first clause and the second clause?
the first, well, if in the current language, it says such gatherings need not provide opportunities for comment,
Right.
although the person presiding
May entertain.
May entertain.
may entertain such
Yeah, they
questions.
can if they want.
Okay.
So I don't think
Okay.
your suggestion makes sense.
Well, except that the although kind of implies a contradiction of sorts between the two clauses.
Right, but if you're not making a contradiction, then why do you need the second clause?
Well, so you're saying strike the second clause
I
entirely?
don't agree with it. I don't agree with it at all, but I want to make sure it's clear.
Okay, are you saying we should strike the second clause entirely?
I'm saying you need to propose language that makes sense. So
Yes.
Just must provide opportunities for comment by members of the public, period.
all right, and then what are you guys going to do about timing? You're going to put that. Is it going to just be public comment is covered by the prior vision? I mean, come on. This is where the rubber meets the road, people. That's why we should look at this in advance and come to with our suggestions in writing to the meeting.
Yeah, I understand that, Member Craven Green, but sometimes things come up in the middle of a meeting that strikes for change. So you can't possibly have known it was there prior. So
Well, we could continue this, we could continue this particular matter until the next special meeting.
yeah, I'm okay with tabling
I'll be off
it
the
to
body
next
soon, so
special
that's fine by
All right.
me.
Without objection, the matter is, without objection, discussion of section 67.4 C is continued to the next meeting.
Thank you.
And I believe that takes us to 67.5. There is no proposed change here. Is there any discussion on section 67.5? Meetings to be open in public, application of the Brown Act. Okay, is there public comment on section 67.5?
I'm just curious, is there any reason why passive meeting bodies are excluded or omitted from that section?
From 67.5?
Because they're not defined in the Brown Act, that's why.
But so what?
We can add it.
You could
It's
say
a
to the
point.
extent governed by, but you want them to be open and public. That's number one.
The reality is this section is duplicative in my view. It doesn't really need to be there at all.
Pardon?
This section is duplicative. It doesn't need to be there at all. It's not caused any problems. I wasn't going to futz with it.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your comment.
This section does not need to be here in my view. The whole
Why
section.
don't you take it out?
It hasn't caused any problems. I didn't want to take things out
I'm
without.
only asking a question. If you want to
Okay.
nail down the issue, say it. That's all.
Excuse me, this is public comment now.
Yes, excuse me.
You know, I mean, if you want to argue with me about
I
it,
apologize,
I'm
please.
perfectly willing to do that.
Okay,
You
continue
know,
with your
if
comments,
you take
please,
offense
sir.
every time somebody
Sir.
raises a point you don't agree with, this is what's going to happen.
Okay, sir, please continue with your comment.
I actually forgot my other comment.
Is there further public comment?
The point
Continue,
has been
please.
made that at times the statutory references to sections or provisions in the California laws are no longer valid because those references are changed. So it would be appropriate when there is a reference to the Brown Act that you might say, or such other act or law that replaces it or amends it or whatever.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on section 67.5? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Point of information.
Member Wolf?
On that section 67.5, in the notation of any of the amendments, it says it was amended by Prop G. So obviously it was voted on by, it was initiative. Well, yeah,
Every
well,
section has
every
that.
section does have that, okay. But I'm just wondering, is it there because it was voted on by the voters? I don't know that we have where we want the voters to now take it out. I mean, I understand what Member Craven Green is talking about. It hasn't posed any problem or anything like that. It doesn't include a passive meeting body. It specifies specifically a policy body. I don't know specifically. I'd have to. I mean, I have to sit and read through it more. I would say let's continue this particular item, just for the sake of me reading through it.
There's no need
I'm
to
sure there's no
continue it.
problem.
Continue it for what? It is what it is. There's
Okay,
no
fine.
change
Then
proposed.
if I have a concern with it, I'll bring it up at the next meeting. Okay.
Okay.
Moving on.
Well,
Because the word passive meeting body is not in there, and only the word policy body is in there. And so the question is we're talking about both bodies in all the sections prior. And here's the culmination of being an open and public. Should all meetings be, how about just all meetings? I mean, all meetings shall be open and public. What about that? I mean,
They don't need to be governed by the provision of the Brown Act because most of the meetings don't exist under the Brown Act.
Right, but passive meeting bodies do exist under the Brown Act, and if we're
They're
going to be,
regulated differently.
I'm sorry.
They're regulated differently. They're not called passive meeting bodies. I believe they're called, I don't have the phrase in front of me.
Okay,
Anyway,
but for our purposes, we call it passive meeting bodies.
right, but then we just take out, this is about public meeting bodies and the Brown Act and saying, the Brown Act really requires a certain set of things, but if we require more, we win. We've already done that with passive meeting bodies because passive meeting bodies aren't required by the Brown Act. We already win. So this is just it.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Moving on.
Mr. Member Wolf, do you intend to bring a motion on 67.5 at the next meeting?
I don't know yet.
Okay. We can,
We can leave it agendized the same way it is today. And that way, if people have specific things that they want, and they've provided specific language for changes, they can bring them to the meeting, which is what we should have done today.
Member Washburn.
I was wondering about the suggestion that Mr. Grossman had about putting a phrase in to say that any legislation following the Brown Act or adding to or changing it should be included in here to make sure that this is always up to date.
I see no problem with it.
I don't know the language to do that. I'm just.
I think he raises a valid concern. It's something that we've actually addressed in this ordinance where changes have happened at the PRA or at the Brown Act. We've tried to note those changes in this ordinance. But I don't think, and this particular, I think it's a good point. I'm not sure it's necessary for this. I think the Brown Act's going to be there. Parts of the Brown Act will change, but we don't need to change it here. Because, you know, I may be wrong. Governor Schwarzenegger may propose legislation to do with the Brown Act tomorrow. But I don't think that's necessary here. I think it's more necessary, and it's a good point, where you're specifying the particular requirement of the law, which may change.
Okay.
We can, since Member Wolf is possibly going to bring a motion on this at the next special meeting, we can deal with that particular question at that time. We can insert language, perhaps saying the Ralph M. Brown Act or its successor.
Although I think Member Craven Green made a good argument for why that isn't necessary.
Okay. Well, we can deal with it or not at the next meeting.
But it should be something we should be looking at as we go on, because I think it's an excellent point with respect to specific provisions that have been cited.
Okay. I believe we're ready to move then to section 67.6. Task Force. Okay. Public comment on section 67.6.
Hi, Kimo Crossman. Again, I would ask that the public be asked to give comment first because we don't have a chance to debate back and forth with you about our proposals. So, you know, we get one shot or one bite of the apple, as Mr. Wolf said earlier. So we'd like to have influence on the discussion that occurs afterwards. A couple minor issues. One is under on page 17, it says there's some new language. It says if a meeting must be canceled, continued, or rescheduled for any reason. One thing that came to mind was that during the Board of Supervisors budget meetings, they oftentimes continue. They have one meeting and they continue it for days and days and days. It's all one meeting, and it's a mess because they do it to prevent having to give public comment on each item. But I'm wondering how these provisions here may complicate that. I mean, obviously, I don't want to help them with the process, though. If it makes it more complicated for them, I'm all for it, frankly. So I just wanted to raise that. I see later on that same page, page 17, line 14, there's a reference to a code section 54596. I don't know if we want to address that concern that was brought up a moment ago about specific citations. And then back to what Mr. Grossman said earlier on in the meeting about virtual meetings and things like that. On page 19, section F, on page 19, roughly speaking, line 7, it says, talks about location of meetings, and it says, shall be held within the city and county of San Francisco. So I guess the question there, again, is what about virtual meetings, or I don't know. I mean, what does that mean? How does that apply? I don't have an answer. It came to mind. One or two other things. You know, I've oftentimes spent a lot of time and effort writing up suggestions in advance of the task force, figuring out what the deadline was to submit those suggestions in writing. I've often found that that's been a useless exercise, that my written comments are ignored or not read, or it doesn't seem that they're oftentimes considered. So I found it to be much more effective to present them in person, and that's why I do so.
Thank you. Further public comment on section 67.6?
Mr. Chair?
Member, let's take public comment first.
Okay, I'm sorry.
On page 17, lines 16 and 17, D, meetings of bodies specified in section 67.3D5 and 67.3D6 shall be preceded by notice. If you go back and try to find, you can
Yeah.
find 3D5, but
Yeah,
I
it's-
can't
True.
find 3D6.
That 3D5 is on page 11, bottom right-hand corner, line 11. And that was the previous 3D5. And 3D6 is on line 19.
Well, you have two Ds then, because there's a D on page
I know,
12,
that should be
line
adjusted.
3.
Yes.
It
So
should be,
which is-
you're right, it should be C, what it's referencing to, it should be policy body under policy bodies. And it should be what was 5, which is
3C.
any board, commission, any,
4.
what it used to be is any,
Would it be, are these policy bodies only?
it has to do with policy bodies. It has to do with,
Okay, well, then if it said policy bodies, initial cap, then it would at least drive you to the right section. But the way it reads, it's very confusing, and that's one of the reasons why you need a clean version so that you can figure out what belongs where. That problem exists also on page 14 in lines 4 and 5.
So, point of information, are those section numbers correct?
no, that means we
Okay.
need to change those.
Okay. So it should be C, or is it D?
It's going to be new C as initial matter, but then it also needs to be changed.
What
So
page
is
are
it
we on?
C5 or is it C4?
It's, first of all, it's C7, that's for sure.
Oh,
And then the other question is, which is the other one? And it used to be 4 because it used to be advisory boards, right? The sense was that those are policy bodies, but they don't necessarily have to meet. The thing here is that these are bodies that are policy bodies, but they don't necessarily meet all the time, and we don't want them to have to meet all the time. And so that's why 7, or what was 6, is included. And 4, what's now 5, was included because it used to be an advisory board.
is that new
but it-
5 or old 5?
That's new 5.
Okay. So it's D5 or C5?
It should be C, it's policy body, it should be C. But essentially,
And C6?
and 7, it's 7. What it should read is C7, and I don't know if I actually need it to read anything else. That's my point.
C7, any advisory board, commission, committee.
So this is on page 13, page 16, line 15, and again at page 17, line 16 and 17. Both of those need to be changed because they refer back.
So,
And it should be 67.3C7. But the question is whether we need 4 or 5 there, because 4 or 5 deal with basically committees.
how about just saying?
And so if there's a committee, they should schedule a time to meet, is the bottom line.
How about just saying 67.3C inclusive? Or
No,
something
no, 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 that defeats the whole purpose. Sorry, it's very confusing. This is every policy body except for these shall establish. And so this is the exception. And the exception is,
Okay, so
boards, advisory boards, committee or committee of federal, what this dealt with was the advisory boards, which we have by and large taken out except for 7, right? Doug is nodding in the audience. And so, at a minimum, the thing that I would suggest is each policy body, except for bodies specified in 67.3C7, and leave it at that.
Okay. You know what is confusing on page 11? 4 and 5 are.
Yes, they were juxtaposed.
Yes,
They've been changed.
right.
Okay, so on
They're juxtaposed, so.
On page 16, we are changing lines 15 and 16 to what now?
Specified in section 67.3C7.
That's the only change?
That's the only one.
So striking 5 and striking 6,
Correct?
and 7 is the only, okay.
And on page
17.
17, line
17,
16 and
same
17,
thing.
same?
Same. And I have one more change that's like that on line 7. 67.C is now no longer what it was. It should refer to, in the same manner described as in 67.1E.
Okay, which provision are we
Postings?
at now?
This is on page 17, line 7.
Okay,
67,
The reference to 67.7C is no longer correct because that doesn't specify.
oh, 7.7.
We've consolidated the requirements for posting notice in 67.1E.
so we changed 67.7C to 1E? Is that correct?
67.1E, correct.
7.1.
Okay, any further discussion on 67.6?
That was a good catch. What about page 18, line 5, line 5,
Same thing.
special meetings? Same call on those?
Same call, that should be 67.3C7.
And I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that covers all of them.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good call. Okay.
Mr. Comstock?
67.1E is not right. 67.1E says public officials who attempt to conduct.
I'm sorry, talk in the microphone, please.
Public officials who attempt to conduct the public's business in secret should be held accountable for their actions. Only a strong, open government and sunshine.
It's 67 point, you're right, thank you, Member
3E.
Comstock. It's 67.3E, not 1. Thank you for,
What page?
That's what I thought. Page 13, it starts with postings. It's an addition.
no, the change is to page 17, line 7. We're striking 67.7C. And Member Comstock is correct, and I appreciate him for catching me on that.
67.3E.
It should be 67.3E, former Member Comstock. Very sorry, Doug. Member Emeritus.
Okay,
Maybe he can run for my seat.
I believe we're ready now for 67.7.
We are.
Task Force?
Do we need to, we don't need to take action on it, okay.
Not
Not
unless
if
there's,
by
not
agreement.
unless there's a motion.
It's only if there's disagreement, and then we have a vote. Otherwise, it's by consensus.
I like this as amended, frankly.
Okay. Is there public comment then on section 67.7?
Yeah, Chemo Crossman. Let's see, on so complicated shall be included in the agenda item. All right, on page 20, line 16, So the description shall be concise and written in plain and easily understood English. I would just suggest it might be better to say that description may be concise and shall be written in plain, easily understood English. I don't think we want to restrict the descriptions from being, more elaborate if people want to give nice, detailed descriptions of what's going on. Just that it needs to be in English, plain, easily understood English. I mean, I've definitely seen scenarios where the description was so short that it was kind of wordsmithed in a way to kind of not alert people of things. So I would say that description may be, or just even leave out the whole reference to it being brief or concise, and just say that the description should be written in plain, easily understood English. I think that's a better solution. And then on page 24, this is about a new section that's been added starting in line 4. Talks about the public may submit comments about agenda items, and it says that they'll be made part of the public record, but I'm not clear what that means. Does it mean it's part of the minutes, or this is different from the minutes comment? So I'm just a little unclear about what the idea is about where this information would be recorded. Is it going to be posted on the body's website? I just don't know what, I'm not saying it's a bad provision, I just don't understand fully where the idea of, making it part of the public record and notating when it was received, what that's envisioned there and how that's all going to play out.
What section are we referring to
This
here,
is
sir?
on page 24, starting in line 4,
Section I.
line 4 through 11. It talks about comments being, this is not part of the minutes where you can give a 150-word summary. This is another provision for allowing comments to be included in some fashion.
Okay, thank you. Further public comment?
There's a bit of a catch-22 with this posting of agendas and the attached records or documents, as they're called. In the cases I've been mentioning where the agenda shows up on a Friday for a meeting on Tuesday, and the public first knows about the issue when he sees the agenda item, and then there's a bunch of attachments. It's hard to produce something and get it into the hands of the members of that particular board or policy body in time for the meeting so that it can get due consideration. And I think that's another reason why the notice and agenda should be out at least another full business day before the meeting. I don't know how many of you saw this package. I sent in a memo. I originally thought for inclusion in your package, and I innocently thought it would show up kind of separately, and it turns out it's at the end of the package. So unless you wanted to go through the whole thing and realize that there was another 6 pages at the end that somebody had sent in, there's no way you would have noticed that. And it took me the better part of a day and a half to put that together. So I think it's really important that in policy bodies make a lot of big decisions, and I think that the public should have as much notice and opportunity to make their points as they can. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Crossman's calling our attention to the words public record on page 24, line 6, where it says that those statements or comments shall become a public record. Well, if they're sent to say the Board of Supervisors, they do become part of the public record. whether this is here or not, but I think what our intent was with this was that they should be a part of the packet, so that they should be reviewed before the meeting, if possible, by persons who are going to comment or persons who are going to pass judgment on those comments or those statements. Just making them part of the public record, I think, misses the point, and I'm grateful that Mr. Crossman did point that out to us. And I'm not sure what the exact wording would be, but I do believe that just it being part of the public record is not sufficient. Now, those that are sent later, up to 10 days later, it says shall be made part of the public record. Well, I know those are public files, wherein each item has a public file, and the letter would be included in the file.
Right.
But I'm not sure that comments sent before the meeting would be included in the packet, where they might be in the file, and it would be up to the clerk, I guess, as to whether to include those. Maybe Mr. Rustum has more knowledge about that, or whether to include those in the packet.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Matters back with the task force. Member Craven Green.
I mean, I think we are addressing different things. I'm not necessarily sure that I foresaw it as what Member Comstock did, which was that these comments shall be circulated to members of the policy body, which maybe we can just accommodate that by saying those statements or comments shall be promptly circulated to members of the policy body and shall become a public record, regardless of whether their authors are present when the item at issue is discussed. Would that perhaps meet Member Comstock's concern and Member Crossman, not Member Crossman, Mr. Crossman's point? I agree. The second half basically was, I think, former Member Comstock wanted it to just be included in the package of documents that are kept about a piece of legislation. So I think that's clear enough. But the former, I would suggest that change, and that might make it more helpful.
Okay. We need to bear in mind that when that happens, and I'm not arguing against this, but it should be pointed out that when something is circulated to members of a policy body, it then becomes, unless there's reason not to disclose it, anybody can ask to see it, and so it then becomes a matter of public access. Again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's something that logistically, from a practical standpoint, that has to be considered.
It already is. Under the prior language, it already was made clear that it was anything submitted as a public record.
Okay.
It does add a logistical element, because it basically, I think what maybe Mr. Crossman and Member Comstock were concerned about is, they can submit something to the clerk of the board and say, circulate this to the members of the Board of Supervisors, and there's no requirement that the clerk of the board do so. This would provide that requirement.
Okay. I think that is a substantial change, and it might require a motion.
Or without objection. I mean, I think we only vote on things if there's our practice has been to only vote on things if there's dissent.
Okay. Okay, so the
So what would it read is,
inserted words on line 6.
those statements or comments shall promptly be circulated to members of the policy body and shall become a public record.
Okay. Mr. Crossman, are you with us? I'm sorry, I didn't mean Mr. Crossman. I mean Mr. Rustum.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good.
I do.
Mr. Crossman, you did have, please proceed Proceed, I said.
I remember what it was. It was a city attorney opinion that said that communications to the board of supervisors were not official records, and I think this had something to do with it. They wanted to, city attorney said if you send something to a board of supervisors, remember that it doesn't have to be
Preserved. They can throw it out.
preserved. I think this might be what was related to it.
I'm not sure it was related to that necessarily, but I think that it affects that.
Okay. Mr. Crossman raised another point that I wanted to see if there's a consensus for change. On page 20, line 17, under 67.7B, the description, he wants the word brief, concise crossed out, or the description may be brief, concise, rather than shall. I'm not so sure that's desirable here, because in this case, we're talking about the agenda. And the agenda is not the same thing as the supplementary packet. The agenda is merely a summary of what's going to be discussed, and as long as it captures the intent of what's going to be discussed, I think brevity and concision are actually desirable. That's my opinion.
Basically, we say it shall be concise. So however long they can take to make it concise. If it doesn't have to be brief, because some things may not be able to be brief, but it's concise.
Okay. So I think there will be no change then to that particular section. It will be.
Other than already
It
contemplated.
will remain. I'm sorry.
Other than already contemplated.
Right. Other than what's already here.
Right.
And then what's in section I,
Mr. Chair,
or Roman numeral 1?
just as a reference to the Brown Act with regards to agendas, it basically says a brief general description of an item generally need not exceed 20 words. So if that's the definition of concise, that's what the current law.
Okay. It says need not. I mean, there's discretion
Right.
there.
Need not exceed.
There is,
Right.
There's flexibility there. Okay, and I believe that takes us now to 67.7-1, public notice requirements. Task force? Fine as is. Public comment on 67.7-1. Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Mr. Chair, I just want to, before we move on, I just want to make one point that was brought up earlier by Mr. Grossman with regards to serial meetings that may not happen in person. I just want to refer to, in definition, 67.3B3, which talks about personal intermediaries or communications media. And I think that covers any electronics or any carrier pigeon or anything like that that might be used.
Thank you.
Actually,
Mr. Crossman?
I do have a comment on 67-1. It's my recollection that, strangely enough, the Sunshine Ordinance doesn't have a subscription for notice provision. That the Brown Act, you can subscribe to get notices, but the Sunshine Ordinance does not allow you to subscribe to get notices of meetings. And that seems like an oversight to me, particularly since, like these departmental meetings might not fall under the, I'm not sure, but it would seem like it would be wise to make provisions to allow someone to, send an email and ask that they be included. This is coming back to my earlier concern on passive meetings, where there's not a way to get kind of a push notification, either by email or some sort of RSS feed, some way of, so you don't have to require people to go check something that they just received notice if they request to get it. So I want to call out there's no subscription provision under Sunshine to be notified of meetings that you've expressed an interest in. knowing about.
Thank you. Further public comment on 67.71? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
Approved as suggested. Move on to the next.
Okay.
And just for the background on 67.8, if I may, Bernie?
Please.
Essentially, there's no substantive changes intended in these edits. They're just actually removing language that just duplicates the Brown Act. So, but Mr. Grossman's point about what happens because we do cite to the Brown Act here, we should add some language in. I'm just trying to think what that language should be. So, for example, in line 13, in addition to the meetings requirements for closed session agendas provided in the Brown Act, Government Code Section 54954.5 or its successor? What would be the language there? Mr. Grossman? Can I ask you a question?
Please approach the microphone, Mr. Grossman.
Can you help us refresh my recollection that, for example, in areas where we do cite to specific provisions of the Brown Act, specific code provisions, what language is typically included to encompass any subsequent change to the Brown Act or whatever?
Well, I'd say as such section may be amended or replaced.
Would ex sequitur be appropriate?
No.
Well, no.
Would it be or its successor? Would that make sense?
Well, yeah, or such other provision or section as may succeed or replace it.
I'm just trying to think of something short.
Yeah.
Or its successor, would that make sense?
I do better when I'm in front of my computer.
I do
That
too.
would do something. I have no problem in just sending you a note and telling you what I would do with that section, that's all.
Yeah, I would say just, I mean, it's
But it repeats
purely,
itself in a number of places. you
It
know.
does.
yeah,
So maybe we should just put in for now or its successor. And if Mr. Grossman has a
Or
better,
any successor provision or section, you know.
yeah, just, I mean, it's, let's put in or its successor now. And if we have a problem with that or if we come up with something better, we can go back to it. But that would be added on line 13 and line 16 after each of the sites.
should that not be throughout the entire
Can I
document?
make a suggestion on that? Instead of burdening this group with each time that shows up, whoever is going to do the wordsmithing should fix it wherever it shows up, because it's going to show up in about 8 or 10 or 20 different places, and just make a note that
Let's put that, why don't we do this? Wherever there was a specific citation to a Brown Act or Public Records Act or other law, we will direct the administrator to include following that citation or its successor or whatever language we ultimately choose throughout the ordinance. And that way, if this group misses it, it can still be done at a later date as an administrative matter. Is that acceptable to the body?
Just a question, if the successor is repealed, if it's struck, then what? Then we have to come back and, what happens then?
Then we'd have a problem.
I'm just wondering if
The
there's
good
any...
news is it's usually expanded. It's rarely subtracted.
Right.
But we're in trouble if it's subtracted. Basically, the point of this is to reduce.
yeah, what you could say is if it's actually repealed, and you could say, as such section existed prior to its repeal, or words to that effect. I mean, you can.
It's true, but I don't think we need to.
Lawyers have dealt with this a lot.
They have. I don't think we need to go there.
I think leaving it as it, with a or its successor, and then figuring out if we need to change it later. I think for right now, it's a good placeholder at least.
So that's the only changes for this section. I mean, I just note, for example, Chris, it's on page 22, line 5, it also appears. But I will work with you to make sure we catch that. Line 29, page 5. But that's administrative, and we'll work together on that. And on line 26, it shows up as well a lot. There may be better language. Anyway, that's it for that 67.8.
Okay, section 67.8-1 has been moved to a different part of the ordinance, which takes us to 67.9, and the chair will suggest a 5-minute recess right now. We're back in session, and we are at section 67.9, task force. Member Wolf?
On B, page 32, lower left-hand corner, line 8. This particular section discusses the availability of documents 48 hours before a meeting, but there is also a section with regards to contracts that are required to be available 10 days in advance. So I'm wondering if we would, if we should exclude 67.25E8, which is on page 6725 here. What was it? 90-something. No, 80-something. 25. 77-something. 25, 20, 76. Yeah, 76, page 76. At the bottom, line 22.
Right, so it would exclude.
Chris, her microphone's not on. Her microphone is not. It is? Hear it.
Microphones, there
There
it
it
is.
is.
It would exclude, or it would not trump, it would leave existing 67.24, 67.25
E8.
E8.
And you
Yeah,
can.
because it's, I mean, the idea was that that provision's more specific, so that would govern than this one. This is more general, but it doesn't hurt to spell it out.
Right, and Mr. Crossman.
So what you could
pointed
say
that
is
out
if
to
any
me.
document subject to adoption, approval, or award by a policy body, not otherwise covered by 67.25 E8.
Now, the question is are there other instances of the same, in the same context?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay,
Well, there might be. For instance, what about collective bargaining agreements? I think isn't there a 10 or 15 day requirement for on collective bargaining agreements?
Probably be in that same, yeah. Yeah, Rick is right. It's in C. I mean, it's in B5,
B5 of what section, I'm sorry?
6712.
6712. I also have another instance, I think.
But it's to be reported. I'm not sure what that means.
If you look at 6725E3, new E3, there's an addition from the previous meetings talking about contractors' bids, responses to RFPs, Ps, blah, 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 shall be open for immediate inspection after the contract's been awarded, and then added, within 5 days after a contract has been awarded. It should also be posted on the city's website.
That's not affected by this.
That's not affected by this,
No,
okay.
that would be. No, what we're in 67.9B is things that are coming up for adoption.
Okay. That's afterwards, right, okay.
So, Rick, going back to Rick's question, agreement is to be reported. I mean, it's not approved, it's just reported. Is that right?
12, you're on 12? 6712. You're talking about in, what is it?
Which page?
12B3?
No, 5,
Well, 12.3.
39, page 39, line 17 through
Okay.
19.
Collective bargaining, 15 cal days, but also going back to page 38 on line 18. Any written settlement agreement, any documents attached or referenced in the settlement agreement should be publicly available at least 10 days. That's another.
Sixty-seven point.
6712 B3.
B3 and B5. Section 12 B3, B5, or 67.25 C8.
E8.
E8.
I think it's E8. Yeah, it's 6725 E8. E is in Edward.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
E.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I said C at first, but then I
Okay,
corrected myself.
yeah.
I think that's an excellent, excellent catch.
So, B3, 67.12, B3 and B5, is that what we're?
Yes,
And then 67.25, E8?
correct.
Okay. Perhaps at the end of 67.9B, then, we can add language to the effect that this paragraph or this subsection does not reduce the viewing requirements, or the accessibility, the public records accessibility requirements set forth in those three sections. Would that work? What I was proposing was at the end of 67.9B,
Yeah.
adding a sentence saying that none of the foregoing in this paragraph or subsection, none of the foregoing in this subsection reduces the public availability or public availability requirement set forth.
Just nothing in this section affects the requirements for disclosure under, that's what I would suggest. Nothing in this section affects the requirements for disclosure under section, and then list the sections.
If you say none of the foregoing, it means everything after, right?
I would just say nothing in this section.
Okay.
Or subsection. Nothing in this subsection
Subsection affects the requirements for disclosure under sections.
E, and then 6712 B, 3, and 8.
We need a motion for that, or do it by consensus?
Do it by consensus.
I think consensus works. Okay, 67.12 B 3 and 5.
Do we want to give a little bit more information, though, about what those, no, don't want to mention contracts or
And-
anything?
No.
67.25 E 8. Okay. Is there public comment on section 67.9?
Yes. I'm afraid I'm a little lost as to what you've been doing this past 20 minutes. This section sets out a minimum floor, 48 hours for any document. Other sections may have greater requirements, But this does not negate those other sections. I don't see how you would think that you have to put an extra sentence in here specifying those other sections, because this is the minimum requirement, 48 hours. This is new language. And the reason we put this in was that, for example, when the library proposed sweeping plans for a renovation of a branch library, they would bring the complete plan to the meeting without giving the commissioners a chance to read it or anything. Plans this big. So we need to set this minimum ceiling for 48 hours. There are greater requirements throughout no doubt throughout the ordinance, but this does not negate them.
Thank you. Further public comment?
I'd just like to comment on
Member Wolf?
Mr. Comstock's. I completely understand that, and I think what we're doing is we're just dotting the i's and crossing the t's to make sure that people know that those they exist, and that we're not saying you can create a conflict in the Sunshine Ordinance interpretation because it may seem or appear that it says 48 hours minimum in one place, but in another place it says 10 days. So I think we're just trying to be very clear on this point.
Member Craven Green?
And along those lines, on reflection, I think the language we just added should go at the end of A, not at the end of B. Because A is when, it actually should go at the end of A, because it deals with disclosure. B deals with postponing the item, so it should go under A.
Oh yeah, B is just if
Yeah.
it's not.
Correct.
Is not available, right?
Chris, do you follow that?
Right, yes,
Okay.
it should be A, not B.
And I agree with Member Comstock, it's not necessarily required, but it just, if it gets more comfort.
There's nothing wrong with putting road signs.
Okay. I believe we're ready now for 67.10, closed sessions, permitted topics, task force. Okay. Is there public comment on section 67.10? Closed sessions, permitted topics. Seeing none, public comment is closed.
I have a question.
Member Wolf.
Was there any, and I may have read over it, is there any discussion about recordings of closed sessions?
Yeah, that's coming up.
That's coming, okay. I thought I may have, okay, thank you.
.11, statement of reasons for closed sessions. Task force. There are no changes proposed in this section.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
That was in the 2008 task force meeting. That's a single strike through.
Okay, one small change proposed.
Yeah, in the form of the agenda. Or
Okay.
In the agenda, yeah.
Is there any public comment on section 67.11? Seeing none, public comment is closed. 67.12, we have some very minor changes there.
And a major one.
One major one at the end, one addition, major addition at the end. Task force?
My only point is that where we refer to the government code, we're going to need to put in whatever it is, the languages, we agree.
Okay.
or its successor.
Okay, is there public comment on 67.12?
Yes, Kimo Crossman. It's on page 41, line 3. At least quarterly, a public body shall review records of prior closed meetings. Again, I brought this issue up a little earlier. Why limit this to public bodies? Why also not closed sessions of passive meetings, if there's such a thing? There used to be. I don't know if they're still allowed. I think there are. And then also, what about departmental hearings that are closed? Why should those also be released at some point in the future? So I don't think we should limit this to only public meetings. I would expand it to include, and by the way, a public body, is that the right phrase, or should it be a policy body? So anyway, I'm confused. I think it should say policy body, passive body, and departmental body. Should all be included on line 3. Additionally, it says, later it goes on to say, if the public body determines that any part, blah, 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 should be with, now can be disclosed. I'd say, I think you need to put in how it should make that determination. It could be, otherwise they could just capriciously decide, we decided it's just not relevant still. Or I think you need to put the public balancing test there. Say that if the, I'm gonna get the wording wrong, but basically, unless there's a strong public interest in non-disclosure, then it should be released. I think you need to tell them how they can make that determination. You're not telling them how they can make that. Otherwise, they'll just say, we keep it closed, keep it closed, keep it closed. So you need to give them the way they make that determination. And then lastly, on line 13, great provision. The Sunshine Commission is authorized to adopt any rules and regulations necessary to implement this section. Great, except that's the language I want to see for the whole document. Why limit it to this little section? And I would change it and say it's authorized to adopt any binding rules and binding regulations, if that makes any difference, just so that you deal with the issue of the city attorney making other assessments and writing their own open government guide that tells people they don't have to do it. I think line 13 and 14 should be stricken, and it should be later on the back of the enforcement profession that says it's for the whole document, the whole kit and caboodle, and again, maybe binding rules or I don't know, something to keep the city attorney from reinterpreting what's in here and overruling your determinations. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment on 67.12?
I just wanted to say the words public body, this was lifted from New Jersey. We thought this was a great provision in the New Jersey law, and they used the words public body, and so we lifted it intact. But
Wasn't it also intentional? Because we don't believe passive meeting bodies can have closed sessions, but to the extent they could, we wanted to include them.
Right, and
So I think that's why we
decided
left it.
to leave it the way it was.
Yeah.
We had this discussion already.
We left it as public body. It only applies to bodies. It doesn't apply to departmental meetings. None of these apply to, because they don't. They don't.
Okay, further public comment?
Ordinance doesn't apply.
Seeing none, public comment is closed. Do we want to change public body? Consensus is for.
I'm not in consensus with this. I'd like to leave it open. I'd like to think about this a little bit more. It's an interesting premise, and I want to have a little time to think about it. If we can hold it over to next meeting.
Okay, we can do that.
Appreciate it.
67.13, task force. There are some major changes here. This has to do with barriers to attendance. I have one little matter that needs to be brought up, and that is in section F, pages 43 and 44. In the text, it refers to by 2012, and in the footnote, bottom of page 44, it says it says 2010.
Well, the footnotes we're not necessarily approving right now. I think we'll approve the footnotes next meeting, or.
Well, do footnotes need to be approved or just correct as we go along?
Through the chair, I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I mean,
Footnote-
the footnotes
footnotes-
are not done, Rick. I need to do more work on
Okay.
them, but
They're
I don't want to
supposed
do
to
it until we're
they're-
done amending.
They're supposed to reflect what's in the text.
Agreed.
And so I think the text governs, and what goes in the
course.
text
Yes.
is reflected in the footnotes.
Yes.
And footnote
Do we note the
39,
footnote
footnote
or-
39, I think, as well, 67.14. Well, we're not on that section yet, so we can deal with that when we get to that section.
You know, the footnotes are still subject to change. Those are going to be updated after we approve the ordinance, so
Yeah.
that it can be done once consistently.
Okay, that's fine. I did want
It's
to
good to
call
point it out.
attention to it. Okay, any other comment on 67.12? We're happy with it, okay. 13. All right, 67.13. Public comment on 67.13.
Hi, Kimo Crossman. This is on page 43F. It has to do with the provisions for broadcasting. Couple questions on that. One is it live broadcasting or delayed? And is it, so that's just a question. I mean, yeah, I think the impression here is that it's supposed to be broadcast in real time,
Right.
and that doesn't, where does it say that?
Line
Oh, yeah, real
22,
time. Real time audio, okay.
And
Well-
real-time video.
Okay, so the idea, all right, so then the way I see it is that on the website, it would be real time, but on the TV channel, it might not be.
Yeah, that's because of the
Capacity.
intermediary of the cable
The
company.
capacity.
Yeah,
There may only be in,
right.
okay, all right. Then you know, this kind of coincides with the provision in slightly later section, which talks about the recordings being online, 6714, it's on line, I guess, or on page 44, about them being online for review. Actually, I guess I'm page 46. So it's a little
We're on
confusing.
13.
We're still on 13.
I know, I'm just saying that this F provision is a little bit related, it's a lot related to the
following
next section.
Okay.
It might be a little, it might be easier for people to follow if they're both combined.
Thank you. Further public comment on 67.13?
I'm sorry, one more thing too.
Yeah.
Should we limit it to City Hall or City Hall and other places where meetings are regularly held? And the reason that's you know, for example, the Library Commission always meets in Correct Auditorium. And there's actually been a lot of desire to see those meetings. And I can definitely see a scenario where, and by the way, why do we say boards and commissions and other bodies? Aren't we using the phrase policy bodies in general? So I'm surprised that
It's
we're,
narrower,
okay. Then,
intentionally narrower.
all right, then the question I have is, I could just see a scenario where a body doesn't want to have their meeting televised, so they have it somewhere else. So I would say maybe City Hall and other locations where meetings regularly occur.
Thank
You
you.
can do that with audio streaming and video streaming very easy these days. I can do it with my cell phone. I can do, the camera here will do it. So it's not a huge difficulty.
Thank you. Further public comment on 67.13? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Any further discussion by the task force? Do we want to perhaps consider
No.
Mr. Crossman's suggestion about other bodies or meetings held at other locations?
I mean, what about the police commission? It was a community meeting at precinct 12.
Right.
Fire
but
commission.
I think what Mr. Crossman is saying is other locations where regular meetings occur. You know, the police commission held its regular meetings here in City Hall. On the library, then the library commission regularly meets in Corette Auditorium.
And let's remember,
Right.
prior to the Sunshine Ordinance being enacted, the PUC had its meeting at PG&E's offices.
Right, but I mean, yes, at least with that excellent point. But you can have a regular meeting. You just need to be careful with your language, because you can have a regular meeting held in a different location. It's not a special meeting, it's still a regular meeting.
Right.
So we need to figure out, if you want to do something else, then make sure your language is carefully proposed.
Well, okay.
I think, this is something of a burden, and I think that's why we limited it to City Hall. I mean, that's why we also limited it to bodies and boards and commissions enumerated in the charter. So our thought was, let's start where we can, and it's significant. It's not that it's going to be a big improvement. It's going to be a huge improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So I just felt that we didn't feel like we wanted to go any further at the Compliance and Amendments Committee. That wouldn't be real time.
Okay, if we're going to have discussion, let's do it with microphones, please. So at this point, it does not appear that we're going to change F. We're going to leave it as is. That's the consensus that I'm getting. Member Washburn.
I'm just wondering if, given that this probably will not go before the voters for another 10, 15 years, and technology is changing, so rapidly, we could put something in recommending that regular meetings held elsewhere, to the extent practicable, could be recorded.
All other policy bodies are encouraged to broadcast their meetings similarly as feasible. It's already in there. Top of page 44.
Oh, okay.
All of the policy bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and in the previous, in the first line of F, it says boards and commissions and other bodies.
Enumerated in the charter.
Oh, enumerated in
Yeah.
charter, right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I think that takes us then to 67.14. Task Force, there are a number of substantial additions here.
Addition. I see additions from the 2008. There's not that many except the strike through.
There's
There's
one strike through
There's one major
from one major
addition
strike through from
page 46.
right.
Where did that go?
Member Wolf?
Yes, I'm kind of going backwards, but page 46, the addition unless the recordings are being, this is in regards to erasing or destroying originals, unless the recordings are being transferred into a different format for archival or accessibility requirements. The problem with using accessibility requirements is if you put it into a format that's electronic for like Braille readout, then you don't have it, then it's not accessible for those who have eyesight. So
I don't think that's what we meant by accessibility.
I'm sorry?
I don't think that's what we meant by accessibility.
That's the legal, but the legal then that can absolutely be argued legally, because the legal definition of accessibility is around ADA.
It's the common usage. I wouldn't say it's the definition. I'd say it's the common usage.
I'm a little uncomfortable using the word
Yeah.
accessibility, so in that, with regards for archiving, you're talking about accessibility with regards to archiving or
Right.
that kind of thing.
Or if, for example, the tapes are going to disintegrate and people want to use them, so before they are destroyed, they should be transferred.
So you could the word in, well, as an audio engineer, we would use the word replicate. So you're replicating or reproducing or duplicating an original that may be deteriorating. You're putting it into a different format for, like here you talk about archival. Archival means
We
you're
leave
putting
it
it
as
away
archival?
for no current use. You want to put it into a format for both current use and or archival. Okay.
I
What
think
was
to archive doesn't necessarily mean, well, maybe it does. Maybe it is a distinction between current and archival use, but I mean current and non-use. The idea was the city doesn't necessarily need to keep 300,000 tapes, audio tapes, right?
Yeah.
If the city has to keep the originals, but if the city, for purposes of archiving them or storage, really wants to transfer them to a better system, they can.
Yeah, I think maybe to get by this point, instead of using accessibility, you can just say something like ease of access or something like that, because I mean, it's not loaded like the word accessibility, and it plainly says ease of access for viewing or something.
Yeah, I know I know I'm getting hung up on the word accessibility versus what's being suggested.
You're the techie guy. Is replication the techie term?
Well, I mean, I think the language is, I understand what the language is. Replication is the act of making the or archiving. I think that's clear here. They're being transferred into a different format. I think that's okay. I think I'm getting hung up. It's for archival, but also how the archives can be retrieved. It's like putting old newspapers on microfiche.
How about
It's
archival or
Ease of access.
yeah. I mean,
format.
ease of
Mr. Milber
access.
has the right idea. I think it's an
Yeah.
enhancement, or ease of access.
Ease of access. Something. It has to be more of like how it gets inspected, because the context of this sentence is about the public record is subject to inspection. If it's not available in a piece of paper because it's parchment now and it's falling apart, and it's been reproduced and archived, how is it then? We want it to still be accessible. So.
Well, I don't think archives are inaccessible. I guess that's my point. To me, archive doesn't mean inaccessible, but if it does, then we need to change it.
Right.
To me, it
Well,
just means it's
which has been some of the
stored.
problems in some of the complaints that we've had, where people have said they've erased emails, but we know that they're backed up and archived somewhere. So, it has to do with
I understand.
you're moving it
What are
to
we
a
gonna do?
different format, but still having it available for inspection in current time, present.
Right. So what do we
Archiving
suggest?
means it's in
Okay, how do you
some
say that?
room in the basement somewhere.
Okay, how do you say that?
And it can be in some room. I mean, that's the thing. It has to be accessible. Maybe,
Could I,
through the
Well-
chair, Member Emeritus Comstock.
could I just
Mr.
say
Comstock?
the reason that we put the word accessibility in here? We were thinking of paper documents that could be sent through an OCR so that they would then become accessible. You could search them by word, so that enhancement, as Mr. Nober suggested, that documents could be enhanced to be more accessible, is what we were trying to get at here.
I see.
Right.
It's not the correct.
What do we say?
Term.
Public accessibility requirements.
Searchable.
Yeah, I mean, accessibility is regarding more to people who are not able to have visual or
Not necessarily, but I see why you're reading it that way.
That's and if you were to ask the mayor's office of disability versus, the city attorney, we'll probably get two different answers. And each one will apply properly. So it's more of an
Let's figure
ambi
out.
kind of word. So I think for the purposes of what Mayor Comstock's suggestion is, I think that should be detailed somewhere else. Because here, this is specific to transferring to a different format. If an original was to be erased or destroyed. So that's what it seems to me. The words just before the amendment is, and shall not be erased or destroyed unless the recordings are being transferred to a different format, which means you're getting rid of the original. So I would take up Mr. Comstock's in a different sentence, a whole different sentence, because the digital formatting of like taking a hard copy and making it into a PDF that needs to be searchable, that's a whole nother
What's the
No,
sentence?
factor.
What he's saying is we're trying to get to the same thing. So if the city decides that they want to take all of their tapes and put them on to digitize them, then I think what we're saying is, okay, as long as you do that, you can destroy the tapes. Okay, so I think
And then take out accessibility, just say.
Right, so-
format for archival requirements.
I'm fine to
So,
say
but
for
here-
archival
but we're-
requirements.
Using the mic.
It's not up to your, it's not up to your
Okay,
mouth.
Archiving is not
You're
the
not coming
same.
through.
Archiving is meant to be stored. And we're talking about if they have audio recordings that are currently available, we're not talking about them being stored. We're talking about them being currently available. So it's
I think
archival
you're
should be
parsing
the,
it too closely. What is the word that we should use, Bruce, if what we're saying is we want to say you can copy originals and destroy them as long as you are copying them to a different
for
format. in order
present
to,
use or archive. For that unless the recordings are being transferred into a different format for current use and or archive or archiving.
For current public use, perhaps?
Yeah.
Well, public, that was the whole, that was accessibility was there for public
Access.
access.
But that's not, it's not holding, accessibility in
No, no,
this
no.
vein does not hold current public access. It's not,
We're not using that term. So for public access or archival requirements, and that by saying public access, you remove the accessibility ADA
right,
connotation.
that's right.
So let's just say for public access or archival requirements. How about that?
Okay, that's fine. Good.
Fantastic.
Good brainstorm, okay.
Brainstorm.
Okay.
That's what we want to avoid.
Anything else?
Exactly what we want to avoid.
Anything else in 67.14? Public comment, please.
Hi, Kimo Crossman. Let's see. I just wanted to let you know that I'm broadcasting you live on the internet right now. That's how easy it is. And that's why when you say things like that it's going to be administrative burden to do that, I just don't understand why that perception exists. When you can think of the 750,000 people that are in the city that might not all be able to come down here, I think we should strongly advocate for that. And with that point, I would say that there's a provision here that bothers me. It's in the legislation that Mark Remy adopted that now you can fix, where on page 46 that says that they only do audio, video recording for meetings in City Hall that are equipped with audio and video recording facilities, except to the extent that such facilities may not be available for technical or other reasons. I would say that we should strike lines, basically end of line 4 through line 6. So, for example, you should not limit recording of the meetings to City Hall. People can do digital recorders if they're no matter where they meet, even if it's just audio digital recorder. And I don't see why you shouldn't just require video recording, and why limit it to audio. So this whole outphrase about to the extent that such facilities may not be available for other technical reasons just doesn't apply in today's society and the technology we have around. So I would strongly recommend updating that with current functionality that you can get at Radio Shack any day of the week.
Yeah.
So, and on back to page 45, my concern here at the top of it, lines 1 through 5, I guess, is this issue of the most common disaster most people experience in their life is fire. And I'm concerned that these recordings are only stored in one location. City records get destroyed all the time due to fire. So I would recommend that you require that it be stored at least in 2 locations. That these very valuable recordings be stored in 2 locations. Simple change to the languages here. And it's a wise change considering how often fire happens, and theft, and accidental erasure. And it's easy to do with digital recordings. And if we consider what it costs the city to have one of these meetings tonight, to reserve a room, to pay for staff to be here, et cetera, I think it behooves us not to make sure that these recordings are preserved in a wise way, and simply requiring that, let's say, digital recordings should all be stored in 2 facilities or 2 locations would be an easy way to make sure that the intent, which is that they be kept indefinitely, actually can occur. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment?
I'm in agreement with that, but I didn't know it wasn't being done already. I assumed that just good record keeping would have them in 2 locations, one would think, but maybe you have to spell it out. I do want to disagree with Mr. Crossman about one thing, except to the extent that such facilities may not be available for technical or other reasons. I remember the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, when there were no lights, but meetings were still held here because city government had to figure out what they were going to do. And this requirement would mean that they could not hold such meetings if we had a requirement here that said that they couldn't hold meetings if they couldn't record them in that way.
Thank you. Further public comment?
This sentence about erasing or destroying.
Excuse me. Could we have it quiet, please?
Thank you.
Excuse me?
The sentence about erasing and destroying documents is, of course,
Could you tell us what page, please?
Yeah, on page, the pamphlet, page 45, page
Okay.
41 of the amendments.
Mm-hmm.
They were just talking about transferring to a different format. That would be of interest to somebody whose interest was to erase or destroy the documents, and there probably should be some sort of mention as to the quality and that they have been adequately stored, or that there should be some reason to erase or destroy them after having transferred them in the first place. Very often documents are destroyed by transferring them to a different format. I'm a firm believer in the hard copy myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Member Craven Green?
We're gonna have to make the same change that we made on page 46 needs to be made on the top of page 45, line 2. So just make sure, Chris, you make a note of that. Different format for public access or archival requirements.
Okay, further discussion by the task force?
I would just, I don't know, I've been through this section, I combed through it pretty well, but I for some reason, I get something that's nagging at me. Can we leave this one open? There's something nagging at me, and I don't have a note on it.
We can. I wanted to ask if there's any sentiment about requiring storage at least in at least 2 locations. This is, I think, particularly relevant now because the Committee on Committee on Information Technology is looking at establishing what they're calling centers of excellence, and they're basically what they would be doing is consolidating the record-keeping facilities. With respect to capacity of facilities, the physical and technological shape that they're in, how much could they, their capacities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something I think that we should consider, and once we do it, we should convey our, even though this obviously wouldn't be law yet, we should still convey our thoughts on it to the Committee on Information Technology. Member Wolf?
Yeah, now I know it's gnawing at me. I think you triggered it. Based upon some of the meetings I've been to in the Committee on IT, the city is now undergoing major reconstruction of their entire enterprise and making it pretty much centralized. So everything is coming into one data center instead of having each department their own little servers. So what they are not talking about is this exact, what's going on here exactly, the retrieval information, how they plan on making it public, what are the policies around all that stuff.
They are talking about it.
They're talking about it, but they're not describing how they're going to go about it. At least they've not revealed.
We're going to issue a request for quote, a request for, anyway, we've had presentations from them on it.
Okay, all right. Because the folks I've spoken to at those meetings, they have not revealed how they plan on doing that. They just said they know that it has to be done. So, okay, that's.
They're going to hire an outside consultant, basically.
Yeah, I'll see it when I believe it.
Do we want to include the suggested language, and if so, I'm trying to figure out where.
I'm not. I think I'm not in favor of it. I mean, the reality is that we're going to be all moving to digital. Basically, I think Coit and other folks are looking at digital backups and how that works, and offsite storage and security of records in terms of. I don't think we need to include it.
Okay.
I mean, if someone wants to propose it, I don't think.
I mean, I'd like to just meditate on it through the next meeting, and go through my notes that I have from those meetings.
Okay, so we will continue then 67.14. .15 public testimony. There are some major changes in there.
Really only at the latter. The first part is not actually a change.
No, it's not. It's just moved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Designated speaker provisions and the time limits.
Correct.
3 minutes, 2 minutes, designated speaker.
I have no changes.
Is it necessary for us to prescribe the number, the amount of time?
Yes?
No.
You mean set a minimum? Or set a
Oh,
maximum?
yeah, oh, this is a minimum, that's right, I'm sorry. That's right. Okay,
Yes,
that's
we need
good.
to set a minimum.
Yeah, good.
No, we do not need to set a maximum.
And there is some flexibility in there in case you get a lot of speakers showing up on a single issue. It does give some discretion to the chair to speed things up.
I like the, on line 15, the chair shall announce any modification to the 3-minute minimum before public testimony on that item commences. I think that's good.
Okay. Public testimony, please. Or public comment.
Kimo Crossman, I just want to say again, I really don't like the way we're running this meeting where the public comments after you've gone through the debate on the section. The comment is like an afterthought. It's, rarely considered, and I think you should ask for the comment beforehand. People aren't using their 5 minutes to talk anyway. So I would strongly suggest that. I don't like the fact that it takes 6 votes to make controversial, or not controversial, but substantial changes. I don't believe that was the case at the committee level. And, the way it stands tonight, if anyone disagrees with any change, it basically gets vetoed. That reminds me of some disputes happening at the federal level where one senator can filibuster everything, and I don't think that's appropriate. Don't think that represents the public interest. On that matter, I think I want to bring up the concern I have, which is how this provision will apply to the practice by the Board of Supervisors in which they have a couple weeks of budget meetings and they have one provision, like one agenda item that they continue on for day after day after day. And they have one time for public comment, and then they call all the departments, and then they call a couple departments, and they adjourn the meeting. The next day, they continue the meeting they had from the previous day, but there's no new public comment. So basically, they have one agenda item that has 30 departments, and it lasts over a week, and yet there's only public comment one time. So you want to speak about a certain department, but you do that on Monday. That department may not speak until Friday on their budget. Well, that's just completely bogus. And there's been complaint. You've received complaints here about that process. And my concern here is it does say that this provision applies to all meetings of the Board of Supervisors and their committees. That's on page 47, line 5. It says, this provision shall apply to all meetings of the Board of Supervisors and the committees. I'm just fearful that the city attorney is going to find some way to reinterpret that and say this was still all one meeting, that they just adjourned it. And so they continued the next day. And I think you just have language here that says, that fixes that issue in such a way that they can't have a public comment on Monday for discussion items they discuss on Friday. That's just not fair for anybody.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Committee?
I would have to agree with the.
Oh, excuse.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Member Craven Green, and then Member Wolf.
We've addressed Mr. Crossman's issues before extensively, and the feeling was that whether or not you can continue a meeting is not addressed by this provision. That's possible. And with respect to the unfortunate budget circumstance, it's an unfortunate circumstance because you're going to have 4 days, 5 days of meeting, and the Board of Supervisors is in a tough position, and members of the public are in a tough position. But if they're required to have public comment, which goes on for hours on the budget, at every single meeting, they would never finish the meeting. So I don't believe it should be addressed. I think it's a bad situation, but I don't see that there's a way around it that makes it functioning for the city to move forward on the budget issue.
Member Craven? I'm sorry, Member Wolf?
I'm wondering whether it's in our purview to make that determination or not for that kind of thing. I think that any opportunities if we don't do that, then we're limiting sunshine. We're not expanding sunshine. If the meeting's going on for 4 days and, somebody's issue hasn't come up yet, and then they're not being allowed to speak on an item, then that becomes an issue. I'm a little concerned about this particular part because I've experienced it myself before, even in continued items where they had allowed public comment in the previous meeting, and then they ran out of time or something, and they continued it to another day. Public comment doesn't continue also, according to them. So, I'm a little concerned on this one. This one, I'd like to. I really would like to see if we can put some changes into that. I can't give you anything off the top of my head right this moment. I'd like to, but I really would. I need some time to think about that.
Okay, then we'll continue this item to the next meeting. $67.16 minutes.
No changes.
Is there public comment on section 67.16 minutes? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Task force? Okay. 67.17, public comment by members of policy bodies. There's one change in there. Is everybody happy with it?
I am.
Okay. Public comment on 67.17. Seeing none, public comment is closed. 67.18. This is a new provision creating a supervisor of public forums. Task force? Member Craven Green.
I think it should be approved as is. At the Compliance and Amendments Committee, we had some input from Mr. Grossman, and his memo goes to this section as well. But with his input, we decided to propose the amendment that the Supervisor of Public Records shall conduct an independent review, taking into account prior rulings, if any, of the Sunshine Commission. It was a compromise. Mr. Grossman wanted much stronger language in there. And he's proposed in his memo, it's in our packet, a much stronger role for this person, independent of the rest of the office. I strongly disagree with that approach. As I explained at the committee, the Supervisor of Public Records is another route members of the public can go to get an answer as to whether a document is public or a meeting should be open. It's by necessity in the city attorney's office, and from my perspective, that's not a bad thing. and this is from someone who disagrees vehemently with certain positions the city attorney's office has taken, so I'm not being naive about that. But the purpose is you go supervisor records office, you can get an answer. Even before, for example, you get a final determination from the department in some cases. So, I mean, it provides a certain way of resolving sunshine complaints. If they don't like the answer from supervisor records, or they prefer not to go to the city attorney because they think the supervisor records is just going to agree with the department, they can come to us. So I believe that we've accommodated Mr. Grossman's concerns. I appreciate them. And we've added language in there to say that the review should be independent and take into account our prior rulings. But I don't believe we should do anything else. I think the office as it is appropriate. It's working fairly well. And I strongly believe it should stay the way it is.
I agree.
Is there public comment on 67.18?
Yes, Kimo Crossman, I think this item should be tabled for discussion with some of the other members of the task force that I think might have different views. First of all, this is a good corollary to the supervisor of records, but the real value, I think, of a supervisor of public forum would be to prevent policy bodies from going into closed session illegally, because after they go into closed session, the cat's already out of the bag. So what I believe should happen is that this should be, the city attorney already has a 24/7 phone number that people can call if there's issues with the city, because the city's a big place and there's always has to be an attorney on call for legal matters of the city. So this section should provide an ability for someone to challenge a body going into closed session, to be able to call that number and say, hey, I think this body's going into closed session, or they're not allowing public comment accurately, or whatever's happening at a meeting at the time it's happening, not afterwards, after the damage has been done, after the votes have been taken. That's when it's valuable, is then. And particularly when you have meetings like this where there's not even a city attorney to rule on things. So I think this provision needs to be, the assertion that the supervisor of records is working just great is, I find, incredibly surprising. That supervisor of records I've dealt with, they always rule the same way the city attorney advises, and while they acknowledge on a rare occasion the task force rulings, they never come to the conclusion of the task force over the city attorneys. So this is really, the way this is written is pretty much useless. You might as well just strike it out because it has no value. It will get the same effect that the supervisor of records is today, unless this person's rulings have to not just take into account, which means taking into account means mention them in your write-up and then, do whatever you want, is what happens in real life. Unfortunately, I think the Sunshine Task Force has to have much more power over these decisions, that they need to be binding, and this is a useless provision, and the way it's written. So I think it needs a significant rewrite. It should be completely stricken the way it is.
Thank you. Further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Task Force? Member Wolf?
Yeah, this is a squirrely issue, because I would have loved to, in any number of meetings, be able to shut it down on the spot if there was a problem or there was a violation. And the problem is then once the violation has happened, it doesn't necessarily, you never can find a way to nullify the meeting or go back in time.
Brown Act.
Even if you had the Brown Act, when has a meeting ever been nullified or turned around?
In the Brown Act, frequently. That's what its purpose is. Maybe because we've never done it improperly. I doubt that, though.
Well, I mean, then the question becomes, we should describe what the proper procedure would be then.
A Brown Act already exists, and there is a procedure added to Article 4, if you've read it, that provides for actions under our open government provisions. But having some body who's part of the city attorney's office who also happens to be incidentally advising a commission that might be going into a closed session is just not workable.
Well, I think one of the bigger problems here is that a city attorney or for that matter, the staff of that particular commission or body, if they are not paying attention to inform the chair that a possible violation is happening, I mean, there has to be some watchdog as part of staff, whether it's the city attorney or the staff of that commission, to let them know. This happened at the school board all the time.
It happens. Don't get me wrong, it happens. But the remedy, the only practical remedy that I see is the Brown Act and the requirements. And is it cumbersome? Yes. Is it hard to bring a lawsuit under there? Yes. Are Brown Act lawsuits tricky? Of course they are. But the thing is, you don't want it. The reason that all of those requirements are on the Brown Act lawsuits is that what the California legislature didn't want to see was the ability of anyone to be able to go in and stop meetings or, to tie up the business of city government. So it says, you're right, if you've got a really good case, you can bring it, there's strict requirements, and here's how you do it. And it can be done. And there have been numerous instances where things taken in closed session. There was just a decision last week down from Orange County. Decisions are nullified, and they have to be retaken in open session because closed sessions were improper. So unless someone has a specific proposal that we can evaluate as to do something different, I don't think it's appropriate. And we can sit here and brainstorm about it, for another 3 hours, but, we've done a lot of work on this, so let's not do that.
I know, but I just don't want to just pass over it either.
That's
because
fine. If you have a proposal, that's fine.
I might, but not. Like I said, I don't want to sit here. I too don't want to sit here and brainstorm over it. I would rather do it in my own time, present you with something concise.
Okay, so we'll continue 67.18.
Yes.
And that's really, you want to look at Article 4, the new provisions, Bruce.
Yep.
That is that concludes Article 2. What I would suggest is for Article 3, we look at the definitions, and
Then we go home.
and then that gives us just something to think about going into our next meeting, and then call it a night. So let's look at the definitions, and there is one minor change there. This is section 67.19. Okay, task force. Is there public comment on section 67.19? Definitions under Article 3.
Hi, yes, Kimo Crossman. I want to comment on page 56, line 10. It says, public information shall include content of public records as defined by Public Record Act, whether provided in documentary form or in oral communication. So there's been a lot of dispute about the oral communication provision, and I think that needs to be cleared up once and for all. And I don't feel like it has here. I think essentially the issue is, can you request oral information from a public employee? And if you do a search for the phrase information or public information in this document, you'll actually find it's very frequently cited. Yet, when there's been complaints about not being able to obtain public information from city employees, it's been hard to get a successful determination of the task force on that. Yet here you say public, you say oral communication. So I don't have a proposal tonight, but I would just say that the issue of oral communication and be able to get information verbally, either by asking a question or receiving it orally, needs to be cleaned up.
Thank you. Further public comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Any further comments by the task force? Seeing none, I believe that puts in order a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved, second. Adjourned, and thank you all for attending, and our thanks to Mr. Grossman as well.